that the United States has a right to allow into this country and prioritize allowance of who they want to allow it. But I think
but I ask you, what? Yeah. So a well-justified fear of persecution.
Yeah, they thought that their farms were being burned down and they would be killed. I think that's a pretty good justification for wanting to come. They're afraid for their lives.
And should it be applied in an even-handed way? That's an easy.
No, our foreign policy doesn't require even-handedness. It requires prioritizing the interests of the United States.
The phrase says you are entitled to entrance as a refugee if you demonstrate a well-justified
the committee will come to order.
Fear of
Secretary
persecution.
Rubio, thank you.
Do you have a different standard based upon the color of somebody's skin?
Convention doing all this.
Well, I'm not the one arguing that.
I know you've had a long day. I appreciate you coming to the committee.
That would be unacceptable.
Well, no, I would say that the United States,
the
United States has a right to pick and choose who they allow
working with you and
based on the color of somebody's
Senator
skin.
You're the one that's talking about the color of their skin, not me.
with our
These
new
are people
ranking
whose
member.
farms were burned down and they were killed because of the color of their skin.
Well, extremely well, and I'll try to keep that going from my end.
Well, you've demonstrated enough. Do you think anyone should be allowed into this country for any reason? Because
who has said that?
We are going to prioritize people that come into our country on the basis of what's in the interest of this country. That's a small number of people that are
Secretary
coming.
Rubio.
You said this weekend that
but in other cases, it's harder to vet. In other cases, it's more difficult. And by the way, the United States admits people every year.
The deadline for submitting S5 requests.
And now there is one group of people that have an easy pass into this country. For the first time, this administration has said Afrikaners get an easy pass and refugee programs for the remainder of the world are shut off. And you can't say to the American public that we should apply this statute
with a couple
in an even-handed way.
No, I think it should be applied in a way.
Reform at the State Department is welcome.
In the national interest of the United States.
Secretary Rubio has reorganized the place in a way that I think is long overdue.
If there is a subset of people that are easier to vet, who we have a better understanding of who they are and what they're going to do when they come here,
input from people before you,
no doubt about it. There are a lot of sad stories around the world.
Millions
and millions of people around the world.
And I think your organizational efforts are going to pay dividends, and I support them completely. And people before you have been talking about it, but you've actually done it. So congratulations, and I think it will be good for the country. In terms of the budget, this is 48% below the enacted level. And presidential budgets are given some consideration.
Is absurd.
This will get some consideration.
No country in the world has an immigration policy like that.
And no one is arguing that we should. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
I believe that there is space to save money in this account, and I look forward to finding a way to do that.
Secretary Rubio.
I think Secretary Rubio is the right guy at the right time.
You're doing
We've had
in your role.
all kind of problems with USAID.
And to watch what you're doing.
We're trying to preserve functions that make sense and eliminate functions that are not
Secretary
the best
Rubio,
interest of the American
about
taxpayer.
For a moment.
My view about this account is pretty well known. I would consider myself a fairly hawkish person, for lack of a better term, simply because I think the best way to stay safe is deal with problems before they get worse.
Some progress,
and put bad guys on notice. If you screw with America, you do so at your own peril. And have allies who trust us. I think we're paying a heavy price for the way we got out of Afghanistan. But this secretary, I spent the weekend with him in Turkey, as he met with the foreign minister of Syria, as he met with the foreign ministers of all NATO nations. And I was very impressed with Secretary Rubio trying to make sure that America First was burden sharing. You need to do more. You need to up your game, but we're committed to a world order here. And we're committed to making sure that the world is a good place to live in.
Promulgated regulations in the last year.
Syria.
Regarding ESG
we have a chance here.
Due diligence
Secretary Rubio allowed me to be in the meetings, and I met the foreign minister of Syria. This is a very tenuous government, for lack of a better word.
To do business
the people in charge of Syria
Secretary
took over
Rubio,
by force
how
of
can
arms.
You work with our
but I've
partners
been,
in Europe,
quite frankly, impressed with their willingness to engage with us, Saudi Arabia, and their commitment to rejecting Iran and moving the country in a new direction. Secretary Rubio this
obviously, when you
said
talk about the European Union
that
and
it could be a matter of weeks or months to this whole place collapse.
decisions.
Syria,
we
and
can
I
in
agree
our
with
conversations with them remind them
Syria
of
is
the vulnerability of their energy
designated a
grid.
state-sponsored
It is,
terrorism
I
under
think
U.S.
everyone's
law since
consensus belief that one of the
1979.
factors that went into
I'm
Vladimir
looking
Putin's
forward
decision
to
to invade
Secretary
Ukraine is
Rubio's
his belief
input about
that
should
Europe
we
was so
change that
dependent on him for
designation.
energy
Is it
that they would
worth
do nothing
trying?
about it if he did it.
My belief
And
is
that turned out to be the
we
case.
have a
Now
moment
you've seen
here
some countries
to
moving
provide
faster
some
than others,
capability to this
to
new government
diversify. For
that
example,
should
I
be
believe on
conditions
Saturday was
based,
the first
and I don't
delivery
want
of
that
US
moment to
LNG
pass and
Italy.
we
They've
have a
opened up a terminal
situation
now to
in
accept it. There are
Syria
other
that's
countries
just
that
going
are
to break
looking.
the country
But
up
obviously
and
these things
continue
take time. But I
regional
think the case in
conflicts.
point, if in fact that's what led
Iran
to the collapse of the
negotiations,
grid, and there was, by the
Secretary
way, a collapse
Rubio
today
has
in
said
their telecom
something I
system as
completely
well
endorse.
in Spain, is a
No
reminder
enrichment,
of the vulnerability of energy.
1, 2, 3 agreements
The
would be
vulnerability for
available to
purposes
the
of just
Iranians
conducting 21st
if they
century
decided
commerce
to
and
dismantle the
economics,
enrichment
but also
program.
vulnerability potentially
Secretary
to being used
Rubio
as a
indicated,
geopolitical
I
weapon
do
against
not
so I
mind the
sense that
Iranian
among
regime
many
having
of
nuclear
our
power.
allies in Europe,
I
particularly
mind
those
them
on the
having the
eastern flank,
capability to
there
make
is
a bomb.
growing, and I would
So
say
right
not
now
just,
they have about 600
awareness,
pounds of
but a
highly
growing,
enriched uranium at 60%.
Fear.
In about a month, they could
Of
go
how
to
vulnerable they
90%.
are on energy,
They have one
both to foreign
reactor,
actors
nuclear
and
reactor,
because of the
and the
strains that are
fuel
gonna
for
be
that
placed
reactor is
by
provided
AI
by the
and
Russians,
other,
and I'm okay with that.
new technologies
Of this
on our energy
600
grid in the years
pounds
to
of
come.
highly enriched uranium, not one
Rubio,
gram
I
has
wanted
been
to shift
used to
gears
run
for
their
a moment
peaceful
and-
nuclear
and
power
come
plant.
back to part of the
Clearly,
world
they're
that doesn't get a lot of
stockpiling
attention,
uranium to
but
be a
very
threshold
strategically
nuclear
important in
nation,
Central Asia.
and that is unacceptable
Think
to
about
me and
Central
hopefully
Asia,
to all of
the
us.
5 countries,
So civilian
Kazakhstan,
nuclear
Kyrgyzstan,
power, yes.
Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan.
Enrichment,
When they
no.
wake
I
up in
think
the
it's
morning, they
good
look
policy
north,
for the country
they
to
see
follow.
Russia,
Russia,
they
Ukraine.
look to the east,
Secretary Rubio
they see China, they
explained
look
the role the
south
Senate
to
and the
Afghanistan,
House plays in
they
our
look
system to
south
the
and
foreign
west
ministers
to Iran.
of NATO, but quite frankly, he's
There is
been
great
very clear to the
potential that I
Russians
don't believe is being
that the
utilized.
Senate is a separate body
An
with its
example of
own
that
will.
is the lack of a
And I hope
trans-Caspian
President Trump
pipeline.
is
You've got
right
these
that
5
Putin
Central
wants
Asian
peace.
countries, the
Time
Caspian
will
Sea.
tell. He certainly
20
doesn't act
miles
like a guy wanting
is all
peace.
that's needed right now.
We have now
for an
80
interconnector
co-sponsors of
to
sanctions
basically connect
against
Turkmenistan
Russia for their
into
invasion of Ukraine. I would like to
Azerbaijan,
get this war
and then
over
into
honorably
the
and justly.
network pipe-
And
the
one of the
gas
problems
line
we have with
pipeline
this war
certainly
is China.
throughout,
In case you're
Europe.
listening in China, which I doubt you are, you're propping
It's
up
just 20
Putin.
miles.
If you
for
would
that
stop
interconnector.
buying their cheap Russian oil, he'd
Turkmenistan
have a
has the
reason to get to the peace
largest
table.
reserves
India
of natural
and
gas
China are
in the
propping up
world.
Putin's
Huge
war machine,
potential.
and the
And obviously,
sanctions we
with their
have
neighbors of
are
China
secondary in
and
nature.
Russia
They put a
and Iran,
500% tariff on
getting
any
that gas
country
out
that
is a
buys
challenge,
Russian
but there's a
oil,
path
gas,
forward
uranium to
through the
prop up
Caspian
the
Sea.
Putin war machine.
Mr.
This
Secretary,
body will move sooner rather
do you
than
believe that
later if
completing
Putin
that
doesn't get to the
20-mile
table.
Caspian
And to China,
interconnector
you want to be
would be in the best
a
interest of the United States and our
normal
allies.
country, act normally.
I think the answer is
Quit
yes.
buying
That's what you're saying. I mean,
cheap
it sounds to me that
oil
way from what
with
you've
blood
described. I can't say I'm
mixed
an
in
expert
it,
on those 20 miles, but I
to
can
keep a
certainly
war
see from
going
your
that you
argument
could
the way
end
put it
tomorrow if you
forward that
chose
it makes
to.
all the sense in the world. And it reminds me, once again, of
Your
why
plate
we
is about
want
as
so
full
much
as
of our
anybody
foreign
I've ever
policy to be
seen.
driven at the regional
You're
and embassy
juggling
level.
so many
Those are
things
exactly
at
the
once.
kinds of opportunities
And
that in
I just
different
admire
contexts
you
where
and
how
the
we
way
were
you've
conducting
conducted
energy
yourself,
policy would
and
be
I
lost.
think you're the right
Those are
person
exactly
at the
the
right
kind of
time.
opportunities that would
So
be
welcome
driven
to
from
the
the
committee.
bottom up. Ideally, we would have embassies, and we would have individuals in the bureaus that would identify these operations,
Thank you, Chairman
and within
Graham.
that bureau be able to
Secretary, good to
operationalize
see
it
you
by
again. It's been
conducting
an
energy
hour or
diplomacy.
so.
Potentially, are there American
For all of the
companies-
disruption of the past few months, we
We're
are
allied
still in a
companies.
position
I
to
apologize.
write a bipartisan bill
Are there American
in
companies or allied
SFOPs, but
companies
things
that can
need to
contribute
change
to that
if we're going to
effort?
be successful.
that,
If the
that
goal,
can help us to fill
I
that
want
gap
everyone
and
to hear
provide
this,
the
including my
contracting work
Democratic
needed.
colleagues.
When
The goal is to
and
reform
Secretary,
American foreign
what's
assistance so that
fascinating
we can do
is when you
fewer
talk,
things
engage
and
those
better.
countries, and I was the
Then
first
you were pushing
US
on an
senator
open
to be in
door
Turkmenistan
to
and
begin
Tajikistan
with.
in
If the goal is to
13
reduce
years.
overhead,
I went over there last
make
November.
more
As you can
strategic
see, energy
investments
is a
and
very
eliminate the
emotional
tiny
thing.
fraction of
It is.
programs that you
I get
feel
choked
aren't
up, too,
essential
thinking about it.
to those objectives. You will have
But
bipartisan
they talk about
support
multi-factor
for that
diplomacy
conversation.
over there because you've got the Russians and
Making
the Chinese
reforms
who
to
are
be smarter and more
actively
strategic with our
engaged now,
investments
and I
while
think there's a
also
bit of a
preserving the
vacuum
things
with
that
the
were
United
already
States,
working.
and we can help fill that
PEPFAR,
vacuum
FMF,
because they want
saving
work
aid,
with us.
disaster
They were
response
thrilled
is
with
still
this election in
possible.
November. I
And
spoke
Mr.
with
Secretary,
every one of the Central
I think you
Asian
know I'm
presidents,
sincere in wanting
each
to
one
work
of
with
them,
you
one-on-one
to
meetings.
enact a
They
bill
were
that does just
very
that.
pleased to
But we
see
also have to
the
have an
outcome in
honest
November.
conversation about
And
what
now
has
they're ready to
been
move forward
happening.
here with a close
And I want to
relationship with the United
address
States. And I think
a few
Azerbaijan
claims
and
this
an
morning.
interconnector
could
You
be,
said that
as I say,
PEPFAR is
that is the course on
85%
the wine
functional.
bottle of Central
You've actually
Asia
cut it
that
to
could actually
70%,
unleash
and by
some of
law,
this
you
energy
are
and
required
move
to
it
spend
towards allies
the remainder.
and friends of the
You
United
have said
States
repeatedly
instead
that
of
only
being dependent
12% of
on
assistance
Russia
reaches
and China.
local populations, quoting
By
Samantha
the way, they've
Power
been
from a
very
previous
valuable
report.
ally in
That
the
is
global
actually
war on
not true.
terror,
The
as well as
USAID
the
report from last year
counterterrorism
found that
mission here as
12% of aid is
I would
implemented
just
by
throw out
local
in terms of your radar, 'cause you've
organizations,
got
but
a
that's
lot on your
completely
plate right
separate
now,
from the
Mr.
question
Secretary,
of how much
but I
aid
think
is
we could
actually
encourage
reaching people. That's
modernization of
Catholic
trade
Charities, that's the
relations
World Food
in that
Program,
part of the
that's
world,
CARE,
where
that is
there's
not
frankly a lot of
overhead. Those
great
are
power
other
competition
organizations,
going
not
on.
local
But,
organizations. But
Secretary, it's good to see you up
flagship
here.
American
Godspeed.
organizations that
Thanks for
deliver
everything for
aid
Thank you.
abroad.
Thank
You have said
Senator
there is
Merkley.
waste and fraud and
Thank you very
abuse.
much, Mr. Chair,
I
and
encourage you to
Secretary
make
Rubio,
any
and it's a pleasure to
referrals
work with you
necessary
when
to
you were
the
in your
inspectors
Senate capacity
general.
on a number of human rights issues.
You've said sharing
related
information
to China, Taiwan,
and taking
Tibet,
comments
Hong
from
Kong,
Congress
and
is
certainly
essential,
the
but
Uyghur
there was
Forced
only
Labor Prevention Act,
one
which I
briefing. I'm
think is
hoping
a
all of
standard
that
and
can
a strategy
change.
I hope will spread
As
to
I
other
said
countries
earlier,
to reject
the changes
goods
that
made
you're making are
by
not
slave labor
occurring in a
China.
vacuum. They are having
Today, however,
catastrophic
I want to
outcomes in the real
wrestle
world.
a bit
Kids are
with
dying.
another
Mothers are
what I
passing
consider to be
HIV
a
onto
humanitarian,
newborns.
tragedy
We are abandoning our
conditions
Indo-Pacific
in
partners and
Gaza.
paving the way for
I very
China
much
to
supported
swoop
Israel
in.
going after
And
Hamas
allies are having to
following
beg
October
for the
7th. We are now
FMF, which they've come to
well
rely on.
over
Even the
a
few
year and a half
programs
into
that have been
this,
retained
and
are
there's
having
a
a
new
hard
phase
time
of
implementing
events, which I'll try to
effectively.
summarize.
Fighting
6
HIV,
months ago,
AIDS,
Finance
helping
Minister
partners defend
Smotrich
themselves,
said Israel should
respond to
thin the
disasters.
population through
That is not
voluntary
woke
migration.
or
He
leftist
also
or
used
radical.
the
It is the
term
foundation of American
encouraged
foreign policy,
migration.
and they are all under
These
threat.
terms are considered
And anytime we've asked for clarity about what the
for
administration is
forced
doing,
displacement.
we've gotten
And the strategies
very
of
little.
forced migration
The
are
programs
food
that you've
denial,
repeatedly
the
pointed to as
demolition
wasteful
of homes
make
so
up
that
less
there's
than
no
a half a
place to return
percent of the
to,
total
and driving people from
SFOP's
one
budget.
area in the Gaza Strip.
So we're talking
south
about
to
less than
the
a half a
southern
percent
side.
of less than a
Then
half
there
a
is a new
percent
plan called
of
Operation
American discretionary
Gideon's Chariot,
spending.
mass call-up of
And if the deal
of
was
troops in
to
Israel.
immediately take all
And
of those
Netanyahu
offending
said a
programs,
few days
eliminate
ago, he said,
them,
"We're
and
going to
enact
take
them,
over
you
all
would
the
be pushing
areas
on an
of
open
the
door.
Gaza Strip."
But most of all, I
By
want
the
you
way,
to
on that forced
understand
displacement or
how important I
demolition of
think it
homes, I
is
wanna
for
put
the
up a
United
chart
States of
to
America, for President
accentuate
Trump,
the
for
point.
you as a secretary,
This
for us to get to some
satellite
rhythm
images
of
done by New York
bipartisanship
Times that show
where the
before
Article
the
1
war,
branch works with you
detailed
to enact an
homes,
SFOPS bill.
mass
We are
damage
ready to
before
do
the
so,
ceasefire,
but we
and
need
then
some
since
level
the
of
ceasefire,
correspondence,
absolutely,
interaction,
the entire
transparency, and
neighborhood
cooperation.
turned
Thank you.
to rubble. There's just
Secretary
basically
Rubio.
nothing left.
Well,
that
thank
is-
you.
is
And I'm
habitable.
not going to give
I wanted to just
the
make
written
the point
remarks.
that
I'm
it's
just
not
going to sort of walk you through this a little bit. That's the way these things are
theory
supposed to
about
work,
the
I
strategy.
hope.
The strategy is being implemented and
Let me
implemented
first
very
start out by
aggressively
saying,
and effectively.
what is the goal here? Because I think it's
These-
important, even
but
though we're
let me
going to talk
return
about
to the
spending
issue
and all of that.
of food denial.
You're going to do your own
The
appropriations
Office
process.
for
We
Coordination
recognize
of
that.
Humanitarian Affairs
But I wanted to
estimated
explain
that
to you
in
the
February,
organization. You have a
2,000
chart
children were
behind you, the
admitted
new
for
organizational
treatment
chart. And this is
of
really the
acute
launch pad because that's what we're
malnutrition.
funding. That's what
I
the
was
appropriations
thinking
bill will be
about the
funding.
strips that are
If
used.
you had the old one,
They're
you would
called
struggle
MUAC strips.
to see what the big difference. I mean, they're
Mid-upper
different, but there's still a lot of boxes up there. And I want you to understand the primary thing we did, that I wanted to do, and that I alluded to during my confirmation hearing. I want the entire toolbox of American foreign policy to reside within the Department of State, in particular within our regional bureaus that cover the different regions of the world and ultimately down to our embassy. Senator Graham mentioned a moment ago about Syria. It was going to be one of the first test cases of whether this works or not. And what I mean by that is we have an embassy. It's obviously in exile. It's outside. It's in Turkey. We are going to rely on them to tell us, okay, we're on the ground. We've gone in. We've met with the transitional authorities. Here are the things they need. These are the 3, 4, 5 things they need right now. And we need to be nimble enough to provide that. But it needs to be driven from the bottom up, not the top down. I want you all to understand what I inherited when I go into the State Department. I get a memo asking for a decision. Sometimes these memos have 30 to 35 boxes in them that have to be checked off. Each box has to be checked off by somebody on a desk before it even gets to me. That just doesn't work. It certainly doesn't work in the 21st century when events happen very quickly. And so we need to be
shows
nimble
signs
enough
of
to make a
being
decision, but we
changed.
also have to make sure that these decisions are being made
Netanyahu
as
has
close to
made
the front
some
lines as
public
possible.
comments. He
What
said
is the
we will
front
not
lines
stand
of
by.
diplomacy? It is our embassies.
Let's see.
It is the men and
We
women who
cannot
are
reach a
deployed
point of
abroad on the
starvation
ground who are
for
hearing every
practical
single
and
day.
diplomatic
And so that's our
reasons.
number one goal. The
He
number
went on
two
to
goal
say that mass
is to have,
starvation
as I
is a
said,
red
all
line
the
that
tools
could cost
of
Israel
foreign
support
policy
from
in the
the
same
US. He didn't
toolbox.
say it was
Foreign
humanitarian
aid is a
support from
tool
the US.
of our foreign
And
policy. It
yesterday,
is not
5
the only
trucks
tool of our
went in,
foreign
and
policy.
there's a plan
It has
to
to
get
be
up to
taken in
100
conjunction with
trucks.
all of these other
But
things
5
that we
trucks
do,
is 1%
and they
of
have
the
to be
amount needed
intertwined.
for
Now,
daily,
perhaps your experience
food
was different.
supplements.
But I went to
And 100
multiple
trucks
countries
is
around the
still
world where I would go to
20%
the
in an area
embassy,
that's
and the
already
embassy was
extremely,
upset at USAID.
hungry. This
Because
has
the
led
embassy was
Canada,
pursuing one
France,
route,
and Britain to say
maybe
we cannot
closer to
stand
a leader
by
who was
while
less
the
than ideal, but we had a
Netanyahu
geopolitical
government
interest, why we
pursues
want to get closer,
these
why we
egregious
wanted to get
actions.
closer to
The
these
level
people.
of human
And then
suffering
USAID
is
was funding a
intolerable.
program that made
So
the government angry.
My question here
So it cut off our ability. Now, maybe we
is
still do
the
that,
U.S. is a
but there
very
has to be a
close
balance
ally,
here. There
to
can't be if they're
Israel,
two
both in
separate entities
military
arguing with each
security
other,
support,
in some
certainly in
cases not even
economic
communicating.
support.
In other
Is
cases,
the
this was my recent trip to the Caribbean,
conveying
where they told me
to
America's
the
always been
Netanyahu
very generous
government
at giving
that
us things you
encouraging
think we need,
migration through
as
food
opposed to
denial
the
is
aid
an
we think we
unacceptable
need.
strategy.
And the aid
Well, let
they
me say,
think
I
they
won't
need in some of these countries is they need to build up police
obviously, for
departments.
many
They need to
different
build up
reasons what we
law
share
enforcement
with
so
our
they can
partners and
interdict drugs
allies.
and secure the streets. And if they get that right,
I will walk
then
you
they
through
can
some of the
send
steps
kids to
you've
school.
rightly
Then they
outlined
can attract
what has
foreign
happened over
investment
the
to
last
their
too long a
country.
speech,
But
'cause
they
I'm
have to
really
get
trying to
that
get
part right.
where our
The third
administration
dynamic that
stands.
I
Well, I'm
say,
still
and
trying to
I
get the
leave
Senate out of
humanitarian
me, so I
aside,
still talk
because
longer than I
obviously
should, so I'll be
natural
more
disasters
brief.
happen
But,
and these
I'm going
things
to have to
will
reclaim some
recur.
time, but go
But
ahead.
the
Try to
best
keep
foreign
it
aid is
very.
well, you
foreign
want
aid
me to
that ends.
answer?
I do want
You know
to
why it
answer,
ends?
hopefully answering the question is pretty simple. Does the U.S. consider this an acceptable strategy of encouraging migration?
Well, I would say that we were pleased and to see that aid is starting to flow in again. I understand your point that it's not in sufficient amounts, but we were pleased to see that decision was made. I understand another 100 trucks are behind that and maybe more in the next few days.
The best foreign aid is foreign aid that ends because it's achieved its purpose. So take country X and they say, we want help with our law enforcement. The best foreign aid is foreign aid where at some point that country doesn't need it anymore because now they're self-sufficient. South Korea is a great example. South Korea was once poorer than North Korea. South Korea was once an aid-dependent nation.
Well, thank you.
Today
That
it is
was
an aid donor and the
brief
ninth,
and well done.
10th
Thank you.
largest economy in the world.
Then the
That has to be the
second part
goal of our
this
foreign
is
aid. It has to be that it
the
ultimately
systematic
ends because it
destruction
creates
of remaining
self-sufficiency.
homes
There are other
as a
tools
way
of
to
foreign
make
aid,
it
by the way,
impossible for
whether
people
it's the
to stay in
investment
Gaza.
funds we have,
Does
or
the U.S.
Millennium Challenge
discourage
grant.
that? Is
Those
it
are outside my
discouraging
direct control
the
or
Netanyahu
purview.
government
They're
from
not. They're under
continuing
the
that
committee's
strategy?
purview.
Well,
And
we
there will be
don't view
efforts
that that's their
reform there as
strategy.
well,
We understand that they are
and
targeting
potentially even
elements of
expansion in
Hamas,
one
is
of
what they
them,
have claimed and said to
although that
us
won't be
and to
my
the world,
decision
that
solely.
they believe that they
So
need
as we
to
move
root out
forward
the
in some of
remaining
this, and
elements
as you'll
of
see
Hamas,
some
who,
of
by
the
the way,
features
have been
of
an
the budget we
impediment
presented
to
before you,
ceasefires
one of
that
the
I know
ideas
have
we
been
have
negotiated
is
and even
having a
agreed
global
upon by
health programs
Hamas
account.
external
The
and
other
then
is
vetoed
having
by
a
Hamas
consolidated
internal.
humanitarian assistance account.
Is
And the
the
combination
U.S.
of these two
that sounds
things
like
will
then
allow us to
therefore we're
deliver
not
aid as part of the
concerned
package
about
driven
that, or
from
you're
the
not. You
ground up.
characterize it differently.
I said this at the
There
previous
has
hearing.
been
One of the
reports
most
of the
important things I
administration
feel, one of the most useful things to
working
me in my
behind the
time at the
scenes to
department
develop a
has been the
plan to
cables.
help deport
The
Gazans
cables
to
that I get from
Libya. Have you
ambassadors.
been involved
We
in
have
any
gotten so many
discussions
ideas from
related
those
to
cables.
deporting
Will
people
those
from
ideas have
Gaza
ultimately made their way to
Gaza
me?
to
Maybe.
Libya?
I
No, there's
don't
no
know, but maybe
deportation.
months from now or
What we
weeks from
have
now.
talked to some nations about is
I
if
want more
someone
of that in the
voluntarily and
department.
willingly
I want
says,
to
I
empower
want to go
embassies to be
somewhere
able
else
to
for
make
some period of
decisions about
time
which
because I'm
programs we
sick,
should be funding,
because
where the money
my
should be
children
going. I
need
want
to
when
go
an
to school,
ambassador
what
goes
have
into
you.
a meeting
Are there
for
countries in
she
the
or he
region
to be
willing
able
to
to say to
accept
them,
them
here
for
is
some
a
period of time?
portfolio
But those
of
would
things
be
we can offer.
voluntary
Which ones
decisions
would
by
make the most sense to you?
individuals.
Well,
So we're trying to
if they're
accommodate that
voluntary
through the
decisions
creation of
because
these two
there's
funds.
no clean
It's
water,
important that
there
we're
is
not
no
walking
food,
away from
and
foreign aid.
bombing
We will
is
still be
all
the world's
around you.
largest
Is that
foreign
really
aid
a
donor
voluntary
by
decision?
a lot.
Well,
It
a
won't even
group,
be close.
many of whom are still
But we
running
want to
loose
target
in the
it more
country,
effectively.
unfortunately. It's one of the fundamental
Another
challenges
feature is
the
this
transitional
America
authority
First
is facing.
Opportunity Fund.
On the broader point of Syria, I would say it is.
Which frankly will
when
allow us
Syria Syria,
be
if you look at the history
more
of the
nimble
region,
in
when Syria is
providing
unstable,
funds
the region
for
becomes
specific
unstable.
programs that
And
arise
this has certainly
outside the
been
normal
true
cycle
after the
of
Arab
funding.
Spring led to
And
the
Syria,
Assad
once
rebellion
again, is a great
against
example.
Assad,
We don't
and that
have
really
any money
destabilized
in
the
the
entire
fiscal year's
region,
budget
and
for
then it
Syria,
turned
'cause
Syria,
frankly, none of us
frankly, into a
thought we
playground
would
for
be talking
jihadist
about
groups,
helping
including
the
ISIS and
Syrian
others
government
that used
6
it to
months ago or
operate
8
and to
months ago.
destabilize
But now we have an
their
opportunity
partners.
to do it.
So you
And
have
rather
this
than have
change
to
in
go through
December.
reprogramming
In
all
my
kinds
view,
of
which I've
shuffling,
discussed with many
to
of
have
you
the
individually,
flexibility at
is
some level
the bad
to be
news is
able
that
to
the
respond
Transitional
quickly to
Authority
something
figures
like
they
that.
didn't pass
That
their
might be
background check with the
multifaceted,
FBI.
and the
Okay? They've got a
approach
tough
is an
history and one that
important
we
thing to
understand.
consider as well.
But on the flip side
as
of it
aligning
is,
it
if
to
we
other
engage
priorities
them,
we have as an
it
administration.
may work
So
out.
I
It
do
may
look
not
forward to
work
working
out.
with you because,
If
frankly,
we did
you
not
have to.
engage them,
You
it was
passed the
guaranteed to
appropriations
not work
bills.
out.
But,
In fact, it is our
but also
assessment
because I think
that,
it can be
frankly,
very
the
constructive.
Transitional Authority, given the
Thank you,
challenges they're
Senator
facing,
Collins.
are maybe weeks,
Thank you, Mr.
not many
Chairman.
months, away from
let me say,
potential
first
collapse
of all,
and a
welcome,
full-scale civil
Secretary
war
Rubio.
of epic proportions. Basically,
I hope
the country
that you
splitting
look forward
up.
to
The
working
good
with
news
us,
is that
not
there
only
is a
because
Syrian
you
national
have
identity.
to,
It is
but
one of the
also
places in the Middle
because you
East where
want
Alawis
to.
and Druze and
And
Christians and
I keep
Sunni and
wondering
Shia
how it
have
is
lived
for you
along,
to
and
be
Kurds
on
have
the
lived
other
alongside each
side
other
of the
underneath the
dais.
banner of a Syrian identity
But
until
we're
it was
very
broken by a
happy
butcher.
to have
Assad,
you
who
in the
pitted them against
position
each other.
that you
So
are.
they face a number of
I
challenges.
do want
The
to
first
follow
is they are
up
dealing
and
with
talk
deep
with you
internal
about
distrust
the
in that
global
country
health
because Assad
programs.
deliberately pitted these
I
groups against each
obviously
other.
share
He claimed to be the
goal
protector of the
of
Alawis and the Christians and
evaluating
pitted them against the
programs,
Druze or whoever
reforming
else he
them
wanted
to
to,
root out
and the result is a
wasteful
deep level of
spending,
distrust. The
reduce
second is the
overhead
displacement,
costs,
upwards of 6,
even
7, 8
question whether or
million
not
Syrians living
a
abroad. Very
particular
successful, by the
program
way,
is
in the countries they go to.
It's
But they need to come. We need to
subjective and
figure
it's
out
no longer
how we
needed.
can enable the
However,
transitional
I'm
authority
also
to create an environment
mindful
where they come back home,
that
where they can
U.S.
come back to their homes, where they can help
international
rebuild their economy.
assistance plays a key
But
role
what prompted the
in
president to move
helping
quickly on
us to
sanctions?
respond
Because we had a plan.
to
We engaged with the foreign
humanitarian
minister
crises,
at the UN
fight
here
the
in New York.
spread
We gave him a
of
visa to
deadly
come into the country.
diseases
We allowed
like
their finance
Ebola
minister to come to
and
World Bank
project
hearings,
soft
our
power.
meetings here in
And
Washington,
that's
D.C.
why
The next
I'm
step was I was
concerned
going to
that
meet
the
with the foreign minister, and
president's
some of you may have met with him
budget
already at Munich.
proposes
But I was
a
going to meet with him
cut
in
of
Turkey at the NATO
62%
gathering.
below the
But the president had an
enacted
opportunity to meet with Al-Shara.
2025
And frankly, he
for
made a bold
global
decision.
health
I'll do it. I'll meet with
programs.
them under the Saudis and the
you
Turks that encourage that.
concerned
And the
that
rationale and the
if
reason
we
is
cut back by
we need to,
that
right now, the
amount,
most important thing is that partnering
China
nations,
is going to
the nations in the
step
region
in
want to get aid
and
in,
pick
want to
up
start
the
helping them, and they
terminated
can't because they're afraid of our
USAID
sanctions.
health
So they
programs,
don't. The lifting of the
particularly in
sanctions, its most
Southeast
immediate
Asia.
impact will be to allow neighboring
Well, let me
countries
first say
to
China
begin to
has
assist
no history
transitional
in the
authority
past or
to
even
build
now. I know
governance
there's been some talk about
mechanisms
this,
that
but they
allow
really
them to
have
actually
demonstrated
establish a
no
government,
willingness or
unify the
capability
armed
to
forces
deliver
under one banner
humanitarian
and the
aid at
like.
scale
But I want to be
to
frank,
anyone.
that won't be
Their
enough.
aid is largely
With the
driven
Caesar
by
Act,
loans,
we can
sometimes
issue
low
waivers,
interest or no
but
interest loans,
these
but
waivers,
nonetheless
because
loans, and other times
expirations
interest,
on them
traditional
are not
loans
going to attract the kind
to
of
trap
foreign
nations.
investment. Ultimately,
They
there's going to
also
have to
give
be
you the money
something
so
done
that you hire
congressionally or
their
more
companies to do the
comprehensively
work. But on the
to
space of
ensure that if the
humanitarian,
right
they are not a
steps are
major
taken,
player.
we
As
can
I said,
create an
even on
environment
humanitarian
for
assistance,
private
the
sector
United States
growth
dwarfs
that
the
begins
next
to provide
9 or 10
economic
countries on the
opportunity to
list
the people of
in
Syria.
terms of what we provide.
But one
And
last
we
point I would
intend
make
for that
is
to continue.
the outcome in
And
Syria will
as
have a
part of this budget.
deep
We'll obviously
impact
work with you
on
and
what
find
happens
what the
inside of
number needs
Lebanon.
to be to fit the need.
Because Lebanon,
but I
too,
can
has
tell
been
you
hurt
that
by a
one of the reasons
combination
why the
of,
number is so stark
clashes at the
is
border,
because
but also they've had to
the
assume
reductions that happen at
responsibility
USAID
for some of
transferred
these
some of these
Syrian
programs over under
So
state.
the combination,
And so
if
now
you
we
think
have to
about it in the
accommodate
region,
that within our
let's say
overall
2 years from
budget.
now, where
So we'll
Syria
have to
and
work
Lebanon
with the
are
committee to
stable,
find out what the right number is to
that
fit the need.
opens up
But I will say
incredible
that it cannot be
opportunities
in,
around the
no
region
matter
for all
what.
kinds of peace and
I
security.
think we are living in a
and the
time
end
where
of
it's
conflicts and
essential
wars.
that
Obviously,
we
this is a big
recognize that
task.
this is not a time of large
big
asks.
picture
We are going
thinking,
to have
but it's
in my view,
a historic
going to have to
opportunity,
limit how much we spend
and one that
in
we
general
are
as a
obligated to
government.
try to explore.
Given
and
the
see if we
fact
can
that
make
just
it
a
work.
few days ago we saw a downgrade to
Thank
our
you.
debt.
I appreciate that. And
These are problematic things, and other nations need to step up and do more.
And it
is
is a conundrum
frustrating
as
to
far as
me
the
to see
sanctions
how
are
much money
concerned.
we invest
We've got
in
the
certain
6
countries,
months, but
albeit on
as
what
you
we
say,
term
the
humanitarian
future,
or global health.
hard to
But when you
predict
look
the
at
future
the
since it
other
hasn't
side of the
happened yet,
ledger,
as you'll get
all the
very used to
business
saying.
deals, all the
There
critical
are
mineral deals,
real issues
all the
and
other
risks in the future.
all their votes at
We
the
can take it
United
a step
Nations
at a
are all
time.
aligned
You
with
issued
China
a visa to the
Russia
foreign
or
minister.
Iran. And so I
Senator
do think
Shaheen
that
and I
has to be
met,
taken into
with
account
the
here.
foreign minister
We are
Amy, and
humanitarians. We cannot
you
solve
issued
all of the
him
world's
a,
humanitarian problems.
a
There are many.
visa to
We can contribute.
come to New York,
We'll
which is
continue to be the
important
largest
to meet
contributor
with,
in the world. But I do
others
think
state.
how we allocate the
Do
limited
you have
resources
the
of our
ability to do
government
that for
has
the
to somehow be viewed through
president
the lens
also?
of the benefit to the United
Sure.
States.
I mean, we could, and there may be an opportunity to
certainly in
do
the
that
short to
come
in the mid to long
the
term.
General
Probably.
Assembly of the United Nations.
The
Probably
administration
will be, and I
also
think
included
that's important.
Gavi, the Vaccine
Let me,
Alliance, in its
you know,
list
we
of
do hear a
terminated
lot of
programs.
complaining
and
and
you've
ranting
always always been a
government's
very
over,
strong
cuts
advocate
here and
for
there
that
on,
program,
on
which
our,
has
foreign
resulted
assistance.
in
But the number you
1.1
laid out
billion
is
children
absolutely stunning.
being
That
immunized
the United
and
States
averted more than
contributes more to
18
foreign aid than the
million
next
deaths.
10 countries
And
put
I would
together.
point
And
out
that's a
that the
stunning,
United
an
States
absolutely
is not
stunning
the
number.
largest
So I
donor.
guess what
We
you're telling
actually
us before
rank
we
third
feel
behind the United
too guilty
Kingdom
about it, that
and the
we need to
Gates
look around
Foundation.
and
But
compliment ourselves for what we
without
are
the
actually doing and
U.S.
have been doing for a
doing
long
what
time.
it's
Fair
traditionally done in this program,
There's no doubt, and we want to do it in a smarter, more targeted way.
vaccinate 75
Lastly,
million
let me give you
of the
a minute on
500
PEPFAR.
million children
People
it
talk a lot
traditionally
about the
has
cutting in
reached
PEPFAR.
every
I think,
year.
virtually everyone
I'm really
here supports
concerned
PEPFAR.
that that's going to lead
but
to
you've done some
preventable
things to it
deaths
to make it
like
better. Can you give us a
tuberculosis
short
and pneumonia.
dissertation on that?
So,
85% of PEPFAR is
I
functional
think
right now.
about
I know know there was
how
some hiccups
the
on the payment
Defense
systems, not the waivers, the
Department
payment
always,
systems, because it goes to Treasury.
due to our
Treasury has to push
law,
the money out.
has
And there were
each
some
of
hiccups,
these
which I acknowledged in
services
conversations
give
with many
us
of
a
you, but we've
list
fixed that program
of
and the money's flowing.
unfunded
So
priorities.
85% of PEPFAR
Would
is
that
functioning
be
and is
on
operating.
your personal
From
list of
there was reduction
unfunded
in about 15%
priorities?
of it, but
first of all, we still
individual
are doing
pieces of the
vaccines.
program. But
We are still
PEPFAR today
doing
stands
vaccines for
at
malaria, for
85% of
example. We're still
functionality.
doing
And
tuberculosis.
you know, when
We're
I hear
still
these
doing
stories about,
AIDS,
well, the money's we're moving money out of the building
What
every
we have
single day,
done is
20
we are
million one day,
reviewing our
35
relationship
million
with
the
a
other.
number of
Money is moving out the door. It's going to somebody. Some
multilateral
of it is going to pay
institutions across
for
the board because
work
many
that
of them
was
have
conducted
strayed
in December,
from their
January,
core purpose.
February
The World
before the
Health
freeze, so
Organization
we are
being one of
paying
them,
back
which I
invoices on
personally
some
view
of them.
did a
But
very
most
poor
of it,
job
a
in the
lot of
early
it,
days
is
of
going
COVID as an
towards
example.
ongoing
So,
programmatic
we're also
activities
closely
that are
working
approved
closely
and
with
that we,
HHS
either through
to
a waiver
identify
and or approval
alternatives to
process,
some of these
are moving
existing
forward on.
multilateral organizations that we think could end up
Thank you,
helping us
Mr.
provide the
Secretary.
aid
I
we
have a number
provide,
of
reach
questions,
more
but
people for
I
less
first
money,
want to
in
go
essence,
back
in a more
to
efficient way.
what you
So
had to say about
clearly
China,
include that
because
in
I
our work
agree
that we're
that
doing.
their
I'm not
efforts are
prepared to tell you whether
predatory.
we've identified today
but
what those
I
alternative
think
entities would look like, but we definitely
somebody
want to
may
find
be
one.
missing
This is the kind of aid we
what
want to
they are
continue to
doing in
provide,
response
but
to
not through
our
the existing mechanisms
ceasing
that we
of
have
foreign
found
assistance in places.
wanting in many cases.
Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman, for the record, I'd like to submit this fact sheet. The PRC
Just to
supporting
follow up on
international
Senator
assistance
Collins'
as U.S.
line of
withdraws.
questioning.
It's dated
I guess the
April
analogy
29th.
is,
And just
say a
to
hospital
give you a
that's
few
running
examples,
inefficiently,
earlier this month, General
and
Michael
a
Langley, who's the
turnaround
commander
guy
of U.S. Africa
comes in
Command,
and says,
I sit
"I
on
got a
the
plan
Armed
for
Services Committee,
reorganizing this
and
hospital.
when
We're
we
gonna do
ask him
delivery system
about
reform. We're gonna use
the
technology.
end to specific
We're gonna-
USAID programs,
we're
he
gonna be aggressive. We're
stated
gonna
that
be
the PRC is trying to
and in the
replicate, in
meantime,
quotes, specific
lay
USAID
off
programs
half
in
of our
Africa
staff
that the Trump
because this
administration
thing doesn't
cut,
work
including PEPFAR.
The practical impact of
I mean,
that
there are
is death.
several pages of these examples.
that's
Another
what we're
one is
talking
in
about.
Cambodia.
And
After
so
the U.S. terminated $2 million
every
in
time we
demining
talk about the
programming in
practical,
Cambodia,
near-term,
the PRC
immediate,
immediately announced
real-world,
$4.4 million to
geopolitical
expand
and
its own
humanitarian
demining
impacts
programs.
of
The
what has happened,
PRC
especially
also
in the
recently
USAID.
stepped in to fund child literacy and
pivot very
nutrition
skillfully,
programs
and maybe even
previously
correctly,
supported by
to what needs
USAID.
to be
So
reformed
we can
in the
pretend
State
that
Department
China is not
itself
doing
and in
these
the
things and picking up
interaction
and
relationship between aid and state.
promoting themselves as a reliable
not what I'm
partner when
asking
the
you
United
about.
States is
I'm
not.
asking
But
you
we have
about
specific
why in the world
examples
we
that
wouldn't
show
do this
where this is
in the
happening.
regular order.
But
In
I
order
want to move to Ukraine
put USAID
because
under the State Department and better
we heard
align it,
the
we need a statute.
conversation
In order
that
to
the president
reform
had
all
with
of these
Vladimir Putin,
programs,
the phone
we need an
conversation
SFOPS bill.
where
You can't just come in and light the place
Putin
on fire and
didn't
say, well, it was a mess.
agree
And so
to
I just want to
any
understand
meaningful
what's the path forward.
negotiation that would
People
end this
really
war
are
in
dying.
Ukraine.
It's not as though
As
Catholic relief
President Trump has
services or
admitted,
care or the World
Vladimir
Food
Putin
Program
is
or a
taking
bunch
him
of,
for a ride.
leftists
Now,
coming
we have a
out and
bipartisan
complaining
bill
about
in the
everything
Senate
happening
that's led
because they
by
wanna get you.
Lindsey Graham. It
This
has
is actually
80
happening.
sponsors.
People are
It's
vacating
I
where they
understand
work.
that the House members are ready
And
to
then
take this
in
up
some instances, the Chinese
on a
government comes in and
discharge
provides the exact
petition.
same service, not a
If we
similar
pass
service,
it out of the
but
Senate,
the same program. They just do
how
it.
much
We'll do it.
longer until we rein
And then in
Putin
some
in?
instances,
And are
nobody
you
does it,
prepared
and as a
to
result, people
support
die.
that sanctions
so
bill
I'm
that
just wondering,
Graham and Blumenthal
Where
and
do you
20
think the path forward is for us to work?
78
Article
other
1,
members of
Article
the
2,
Senate support?
former colleagues,
Well, let me
to get
answer your
this
last
thing back
question
on track?
first.
Well, I think
and
the
that is
first
about
path
the bill.
is,
We obviously can't
let me just
control
say on
what
the regular
Congress does,
order
and we've
part,
told the
sure, we
Russians
want to do
this.
that. We'd
Not
be great
now,
to
6,
make
8
all
weeks
these things
ago.
statutory
I
and
believe
codify them.
Senator
That would
Sheen,
be
you were
ideal.
involved in a
I will say I
conversation
was
that
a
made it
member
clear
of
to
this
the
body
Russians
for
what would happen if there was no progress made. And that's been
16 years,
repeated multiple
and
times.
we always talked
I would
about
also
doing it
make
by
this
regular
point, and
order,
it's
never got
important.
to it.
Every
So
single
now's the
sanction,
time to do it because
not
we
one
really have
sanction's
to
been
do it
lifted
now.
on the
The
Russians.
second
Every
point I
single
would make is
sanction
the
that was
US
in
is going to
place under the
continue to be
previous
a very
administration
generous donor
remains
for
in
free
place.
ma-
So this
I would
idea we've
venture
given
to
up leverage,
guess that
well,
for
the
the
only
rest
leverage,
of our
we have the
lifetime,
same
no
leverage
nation
today
on
we
earth
had
that
under
we
the
can still
previous
afford it.
administration.
No nation
Well,
on
I
earth
would-
will continue to do more for
Secretary, I would
humanitarian
argue that the
assistance,
leverage that
for
we've given
food
up
and medicine
is
and
taking
life-saving services,
NATO
and and even for
membership off the
developmental
table,
assistance.
taking
But I also think
away
we have to
a
recognize this.
commitment to
We
continue
cannot
to
be
help
we
the
cannot
Ukrainians
continue
with
to be the
intelligence
foreign aid
sharing and
provider
with
for everyone on everything. We just
military
can't do it.
equipment and
We can't do it
arms that
efficiently.
they need to help fight this
And we
war.
cannot afford
that
to do
continues.
it either. And if we're going to, we have
there
to,
was a
we do
pause
not
for
have
1
unlimited
week.
resources,
All of that
and
was
so we now
restarted
in
That
an
was
era,
intelligence
particularly
sharing, though, but
geopolitics,
it doesn't
where we have
cover
to be very
the
careful
equipment and
about
arms that
Oh,
where
absolutely.
we
That
invest
program's
our
not been
money, where
rescinded.
we
They continue to
provide aid.
receive
and we
armaments from the
continue
United
to,
States.
to fund
Okay, you have a
what the
mudslide somewhere, an earthquake,
Ukrainians need as the president, and are
hurricane,
you
and we're gonna help
prepared to
people. I don't know
pass
how
another
much,
supplemental
we would want
bill to
necessarily.
support them.
Well, that's a
to
different
make it.
decision. That's a different question. That's not up for me to decide. The White House would have to make a determination about whether to come to Congress for a supplemental. But everything that's been approved and congressionally appropriated is ongoing. In fact, to the extent that the Ukrainians have asked for anything additional, what they've asked for is air defenses, Patriot units, which frankly we don't have. But we are working closely with our NATO allies. There are NATO allies that do have some batteries of Patriot missiles that they could provide or transfer over to the Ukrainians to defend, for example, the airspace of Kyiv and other places. And we've been encouraging on that front and working alongside our partners there to get deliveries of some of these systems. As you can imagine, none of these countries want to give up their Patriot systems either. But we can't make them fast enough. And part of the challenge we have in Ukraine is that munitions are being expended substantially faster than the ability of the broader West, not just us, but the West.
Our embassy can say we want to provide food
now,
in
that
the
said,
community.
on the
Here's
issue of
best
Ukraine,
people
here's
to
what
do
we
it,
can
and
all
I can
agree on.
avoid
There
all
is
those
no
layers
military
of
solution
engineering.
to this
Part of the
crisis.
problem, right,
It will
is-
have to
is
end in a
our
negotiated
tolerance for
settlement.
risk.
And the fundamental challenge we have in
Because
Ukraine
if
is
we
this.
establish a bunch
Russia
of
wants what they do not
criteria
currently have and are not
requirements
entitled to.
pre-audit,
And Ukraine wants
then
what they
you
cannot
increase
regain
administrative
militarily.
costs, right?
And that's been
I'm
the
one
crux
these
of the
people who
challenge.
thinks that it's
I
not
don't
unreasonable
disagree
to
with
start
that
to
at one level.
capitate or
But on the other
slowly
hand,
ramp down
what Vladimir
administrative
Putin
costs. But
is
if
doing now
administrative
is
costs are
playing
not
for time.
88%,
And he's playing
right?
this president
That
like a fiddle.
12% versus
And
the rest of it
the more
cut is
longer he plays
what
it,
money
the
goes
more
to local
opportunity he has
NGOs
to
in
gain
Africa or
territory
or
in
Asia
Ukraine,
or
and the harder
or
it's going to be to
Pacific
get him
Islands
to
or
the
wherever.
table.
But
What
I-
we
And
need
should
to do
be
is to put
increasing that
pressure
number, and
on
we have been increasing
Vladimir
that number.
Putin in every
But
way
it
we
is the
can to
precipitousness
ensure that we can
with
get them
which
to
this is all
the
being done,
negotiating table.
that is actually
Well,
causing
I disagree with this
reputational damage.
playing
A lot
with a
of us are
fiddle
doing
analogy because the truth of the
codels,
matter
and
is
when
when
we sort of
Vladimir
go
Putin woke up this
overseas,
morning, he had the same set of sanctions
and
on
we're-
him that he's always
we sort
had
of,
since the beginning
you
of this
know,
conflict. And Ukraine was still getting
temporarily
armaments and
take
shipments
off
from
our
us and from our
partisan
allies, and the European
We
Union
interact
is
with the
about to
same
impose
providers,
additional sanctions,
and we
and the
see
U.S. is looking for no Patriot
kids
batteries
on
to be able to
half
transfer from
rations,
other NATO nations
smaller and
into
smaller.
Ukrainian hands.
We see
And what the
kids
president's trying to
getting
do is end a
HIV
war.
AIDS from their
He's
parents.
trying to end a
Nothing
bloody,
you said.
costly war that neither
With
side
nothing
can
you
win,
said.
I
and
think
people
we
are
all
dying every
support.
single day.
But-
And so, but this notion that
In
I
order to
don't,
implement
what has
anything that
Putin
you're
gained
talking
throughout this? He
about,
hasn't gotten a
is it
single
necessary?
concession. He hasn't gotten a
He's gotten
single sentence
time,
to
lifted.
allow
and the more
children to
time he
die.
gets without
And
additional
yet that is
pressure
what's
on
happening.
Russia, the
And
more
so, can we please separate
incentives
these two
he's got
questions
to
of,
Well,
continue
should we
to
reform the State
Yeah.
Department,
gain
should we
territory
reform
and
the
continue to
foreign
play
aid
for time. But
enterprise?
I want to just
And
get to
should we
a
do it
final
in such a
question because my time is
catastrophically
running out.
unlawful way
And that
that
is,
people around
I
the
recently
world
wrote a
die,
letter
and
to
people
you
come to believe
about the
that they
issuance
can't
of executive
believe
orders on
that
thousands
America
of
is a
Afghan
reliable
allies.
partner anymore.
These
And
are
so
people who
just-
fought
if we
alongside our
can
military
please
during
separate
the
these
war in
questions
Afghanistan.
and
They've
get
been
to writing
stranded
a
in
bill,
Qatar and
I think the
Albania and
country will be better for
Pakistan and Afghanistan. These are individuals who have been vetted already.
Thank
They're
you.
ready to travel
To
to the United States.
committee members,
And
I'm
the
very
question I
much
have is
believe
this
in
administration going
soft
to allow
power,
them
for
to
lack
come
of a
to the
better
United
term.
States as it promised?
Why do we
Because
have PEDFAR?
unless we're
Not
willing
only is the
to
right thing
keep our
to
commitments
do, I
to
think
those
it's just
people who are
smart
willing to
foreign
fight
policy.
and die
If you
alongside
can
of us,
save a
then how can we
child, the
ever
parents will probably
ask people to do
have a
that
good view
again?
to you.
Yeah,
So,
a couple points. Some of
Dobby,
those
you know,
are
keeping
I think
people
the issues that
vaccinated.
is getting
That
mixed
makes
up here
perfect
is
sense. And
whether
to the
we are going
people
to
who
pay for them
believe
to fly to the
that over
United
there
States
doesn't
once
matter to
the
us.
visa is issued, or whether they have
How
to
do
find their own
diseases start?
transportation to the
Usually
U.S.
over there.
So there's two separate topics: our
I'd
payment
like
to
to
move
get ahead
people
of it over
forward,
there before it
but
gets
also
here.
the issuance of the visas.
I'd like to have
And
less hungry
when
children, so
that is still going
the
through
Taliban
an internal
and
review as
Al-Qaeda
to
and
who is
ISIS
going to be
can't
allowed in.
recruit
There's
these
been a
people
review of
because they're
the
starving.
vetting process that's
What
been
would you
used.
do if your
Frankly,
family
there
was
have been some
starving?
errors
Almost
found in the
anything.
previous vetting process that we're
$500
concerned
goes
about,
a long
and I'm
way for a
separating out
starving
from that
family.
audience.
So this
people
to me
who we
is
have
national
closely
security
vetted
in
because we've
another
been working
form. And the
alongside them
people
for
who don't
many
get
years
that, you're
with
just-
regards to
you're
their
missing a
service
lot.
alongside our intelligence
You're
forces
missing
and special
how
operators on the
terrorists
ground
recruit.
from the broader.
They
Remember,
love
they're also
chaos.
bringing dependence with them.
They love
So there were some concerns early
situations
on
where
about
people
freezing or
starving and
slowing
can't
down this
send their
program
kids to
until we
school
could
and
determine whether
they
we were
can't feed
properly
themselves
vetting
'cause
people
they'll fill
to
in
come
that
towards the
vacuum.
United States.
But I will say
and
this
that
about
process is
Secretary
ongoing,
Rubio.
and I
He
think
gets it
we'll
better
have
than anybody.
more concrete
And
answers
I
for you,
will
which I know is
work
not
with you
satisfactory
to
at this
change
moment,
the
but
system
we've
to make
obviously
it
had a
more
lot going
logical,
on, but this is
more
something something that we've heard a
effective.
lot from both our
But
DoD
I am
partners
here to tell
and
you,
others in the
if
intelligence
we
community.
eliminate
and we're working
some
to
of
make
these
progress on
programs
that.
that create stability over there,
I'm out
the
of time.
chaos
Just
will surely
to
come
clarify
here.
on
And if you don't
last
get
week,
that,
Secretary
you've
Noem
missed
announced
a
that
lot of
temporary
history.
protected status, which
Having
I
said
understand
that,
is not exactly the same.
Marco,
but for over
what you're doing
8,000
at the State
Afghans would
Department is
end on
long
July
overdue,
12th.
and we'll find
Many of
some
those
common
people are
ground,
people, again,
through
who
the SFOPS,
fought and died alongside of our
process
men and women
to
in the
accommodate the
military.
reforms you
And for
want,
us
but
to
also
send
to
them
make sure
back
that
to
our values
sure
are intact and
death at the
we're
hands
smart
of the
with our
Taliban
dollars to
is
make sure that
just
we're not creating conflict
what
where
they
we
were
could avoid
promised
conflict.
when they agreed to fight with
If you're
us.
tired of
Thank you,
war,
Mr.
count
Chair.
me in.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen.
I think I
Senator
know how
Ricketts.
most of these wars start.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
They start
Rubio,
with
welcome.
terrorists being able to recruit people.
The United States,
and if we can take that off the table, we're safer.
I'm
going to go through a list of issues real quick.
And
do you think it's in our interest to relieve sanctions in Syria?
We know the increasing aggression of Communist China, Iran, North
Do
Korea.
you have as your objective to
Iran
change the state-sponsored terrorism designation over
this
time?
This is a theocracy that's got brutal mullahs and corrupt military.
They meet the standard.
They chant
Is
death
it
to
your
America,
position
death to Israel.
when it comes to Iran
You've had
that
4 rounds
civilian
of
nuclear power
negotiations
through
with them
1,
so
2,
far,
3
and I think
agreements?
you framed it
is in
best
our
when you
national
said earlier
interest?
this month they have to walk away from
I think
sponsoring
that if it
terrorists. They have
prevents
to
them
walk
from
away
having
from
a
helping
nuclear weapon,
Houthis. They have to walk away
that
from
would be in
building
our national
long-range
interest.
missiles
So
that have no purpose to
dismantlement
exist
plus a
other
1,
than
2, 3 agreement.
having nuclear weapons.
Get out of the enrichment
and they
business.
have to walk away from
If you do that, you can have a 1, 2, 3 agreement.
And that
is that a
enrichment
fair
is particularly
summary of
important,
where you're
as
at?
you've stated,
or something
and
equivalent
Steve
to it that
Witkoff,
allows them, if
I
they
think
want, to
reemphasized
have
over the
a
weekend,
civilian
the ability
nuclear
to enrich
program,
it
but
in
not the ability to enrich.
3.67%.
Count me in.
For a
I think
civilian
that's very
program, it
smart.
only takes a few
You
weeks
keep
to get
saying, and I
90%
was
for
with you all weekend,
military-grade weapon.
you were great
Now,
talking about,
what I'd like you to just talk about
you wanted
real
this war
briefly
honorably
is
and
what
justly.
are you
And do you agree that the
thinking
way we
about
end the
when you
war
say
in
they've
Ukraine
got
with
to
Russia could affect
get
how
rid of
China
their nuclear
views
program? They've got
what
to
they
have
do in
complete
Taiwan?
disarmament. Is
I
it
think
still
the
a policy
way we
that
end
they
the war could
cannot be
impact
allowed to
how
enrich
China
at
views it. I
all
think
in Iran?
the continuity
Thank
of
you.
this war
Well,
will
obviously,
also impact
those
it
are
because
ongoing,
it's
or
draining
hope to be
resources
ongoing
from us
negotiations
and
because
from
the
our
alternative would
allies
be far
that
worse,
could be
in my
spent on
view,
building
but
up our
maybe
capacities in the
necessary. But we hope that
Indo-Pacific,
we
so
can
both
reach an
can be
agreement
true.
with Iran.
Yeah, I
So
totally
here's the
agree with you.
baseline that
When
I
it comes
described to
to
everybody.
Russia getting to
If
the
what
table,
Iran wants is a
do you
civil
think
nuclear
Putin's ready to
program,
make
energy,
peace?
the ability to
I think
develop
Putin
nuclear
will
energy,
always
there's a model for
cut the
that.
deal he thinks
Multiple
is in his
countries
best
around the world
interest
currently
for the
follow.
for Russia
And that
and for
allows
his
them
view
to
of the
build
world.
reactors and then bring in enriched
I think right
material
now,
and use
frankly,
it
he
to
has said,
generate
here's the
electricity.
latest. He says
And that's a
he's
model
going
that would be
to
available to Iran
submit
potentially
a
if they
proposal
choose to take it. If, on the other
that would lead
hand,
to a ceasefire
they want to retain
that would then
enrichment
lead to a broader
capability.
negotiation.
And I just
I think
described
we
this because
will know
if
from the
anyone's watching
context
this or
of
in the
that
future,
proposal
this can get a little
where their
complex. All of
mindset
you
is and where
understand
they
it.
stand.
For the general public,
You
it's
keep
important
telling
you get into
people,
the details
rightly
of this.
so, that the
Once you
Senate,
know how to enrich
you
at
can't
any
stop.
level,
I mean, we want
all
to
you
work
need is
with you.
time
These
to be able to
sanctions
enrich
are
at a higher
designed to
level.
help,
And they've
not
already
hurt.
proven
I'm
the
trying
ability to
help
enrich
the
at a
president,
higher
give him
level. In fact,
leverage.
they have.
To my
And
Democratic
are doing so
colleagues,
now.
thank you for being on board.
In
We're
fact, their
trying to get the
legislative
right
branch
answer
passed a
here.
law
This
requiring
is not a
them to break
competition between
JCPOA
us and
and
the
enrich way
administration. It's
beyond,
trying to
almost
coordinate
well
effort
beyond
to
60%.
end the war that
So you're absolutely right.
that
About
President
90%
Trump
of the
is
work
right
of enrichment
to want to end.
is getting
I
to
guess
that
here's my
3.67
question.
level. After
We'll know in
that,
a
the rest
couple
of it is just a
whether or not
matter
they're
of time.
serious.
Not to mention
Do you
what the
believe
gap is from the
that
20%
if there were
for
tariffs
medical
on
isotopes,
China
which is the other thing they
for
insist upon.
buying
So the
cheap
Iranian
Russian
position is that they
oil,
don't just want
that would make
energy.
a difference?
They
toward
claim that enrichment
Chinese
is a matter of
policy
national
regarding
pride.
Russia.
It is our view that they
500%
want enrichment
tariff?
as a
Yeah, I think that
deterrent.
has an impact on
They believe that it makes them a threshold
nations.
nuclear power, and as
I
a
agree.
result,
Do you
becomes
agree that
untouchable.
if
And that is the crux
China
of the situation
stopped
we're facing
buying,
right now. And there are other actors, and I
oil
won't go
from
much
the
deeper
shadow
into it, but there are
fleet,
other
it
nation
would
states in the
put a
region
real
that are
dent
also
in Putin's war
range
machine?
from uncomfortable
I think
all
it's
the way
widely
to
understood, including
view
by
as an
our
existential
European
threat.
partners.
The
and
belief
I
that
remind
Iran
them
could
of this
ever
all
be
the
in a
time when we're
position
together
of
with them, that there is no
maintaining
way
its
that Russia
enrichment
can sustain
capability
its
in the
war
long
effort
term
without
that could
assistance
quickly
from
be
China.
weaponized.
China
So
has
that is the
helped
basis
Russia
upon
as
which
much as
we
they
are
can without getting
negotiating
caught.
with the Iranians.
Do you
Our
think
hope
Europe
is that we
is
can
serious
encourage them
about
to
doing
show them
their
a path
part
towards
when it comes
prosperity
to
and peace that allow them to
sanctions on
develop their
Russia and
economy,
trying to find
that
a
allow them,
solution
if
to
they
end this
want,
war?
to have a civil
Yeah,
nuclear
we actually saw
energy
the,
program like other countries around the
we met
world
with them
have
this
without
weekend in
enrichment.
Rome,
And
and
it's
they
our
are
hope we
on
can
path
encourage
and
them in
on-
that direction.
they are en
The
route
President
now
has been
to,
very
maybe as
clear,
early
and
as
I
the
won't
middle part of
elaborate
this
any
week,
further, that they are
applying
never going to
additional
get a
sanctions
nuclear
on
weapon.
Russia.
That is not going to happen.
Thank you very
But he
much.
much prefer, I much
think
prefer,
Sir
and I would venture to guess all of you would much prefer, if we could reach an
I think it's
arrangement
Merkley's
where they
what I've
agree
got.
to this off-ramp, to
Coons.
this
Thank you.
pathway
There you
towards
are.
prosperity
Sarah
and
Coons.
peace, as opposed to the road they have
Sarah
been on for
Merkley.
the last 20 years. And
Peace is breaking out on the
it will
committee.
not be easy, but that's the process we're engaged in now.
Right, thanks. So let's go to Communist China, because they're the greatest existential threat that we face as a nation. We both agreed last time.
Thank you, Chairman Graham, Ranking
you were
Member
before this
Schatz.
committee that
Good
we
to be
need
with
an
you
all
again,
of
Secretary
government,
Rubio.
not just an all of government, but we also need an all of society approach.
I wanted to make sure
on how
that
we
the
face
point's been made, as I
Communist China.
suspect it
was
has been by my
this was
colleague.
illustrated in a recent tabletop
That reform
exercise that I did
to
with,
USAID
Senator
and
Coons
reform
others
to
in
some of the authorities
talking
and
about
the spending in the
contingency where
legislation that we
Beijing
passed in
tries
the last
to do an
Congress
energy quarantine
is something that could
on
easily have
Taiwan
been done
to
with
force them to,
partnership with this committee and
capitulate.
with Congress,
and
should have
obviously
been
unlocking
done that way.
Americans energy
I wanted to touch on a
is one
few
of the ways
things
that we can help
that you and I worked on
counter this with LNG
that I
and
think deserve
biofuels,
continued
some of our
support
strongest tools
and
to
that
be
I
able to
think
help
are
our allies
important
and
for us to
partners.
sustain.
Cutting red tape,
Senator
unleashing
Graham and I
American energy in the
worked to
private
pass
sector.
the
We're
Global
positioned to
Fragility
be
Act in
an energy
2019.
supplier
You
here
were a
of choice.
co-sponsor.
But we
It
need
was
the
signed into
infrastructure
law
in
by
place,
President
and that
Trump.
includes having a
And
West
it's
Coast
designed to
LNG
save literally
terminal.
billions of dollars by
Can you talk a little bit about
addressing
what
root
you're
causes
thinking
of
about
terrorism
when
in
it comes
fragile
to this type of
countries?
contingency with
As
regard
you put
to
it at the
energy
time,
quarantine in Taiwan?
as the
and
U.S.
how the
responds to
administration would
humanitarian
approach that?
crises, we
Well,
must
first of all,
address
we
the factors
devastating. The
driving
U.S., as you know,
instability and violence.
has agreements
It's
in
both
place
moral
and
and
assurances
international
it's made
security to
on
promote stable and
maintaining the
prosperous
status quo in that
countries,
region. Those will
and I'm
remain
proud to
viable
introduce
without
this
trying to be
legislation. I am planning
alarmist
to
here.
work
We know
with
what those
Senator
are.
Graham on
We hope
reauthorizing
that
it
never
this year.
happens. But I think
The
the broader
primary
issue that you
implementing
touch upon,
entity had
which I don't
long
think
been
is
the Bureau
widely
of
understood,
Conflict
again,
Operations
members
and
of the committee who
Stabilization.
follows this closely understand it,
That's
but more
a bureau
broadly,
that's been
is the
restructured.
dangerous imbalance
Do you still
that has
agree it's in
developed,
our national interest to
between China
have a
and the rest of
targeted
the world on a
strategy to
number of
address the
fronts?
root causes
The first is
of terrorism?
on access
And
to
will
rare
you work
earth
with
minerals,
us to sustain
which
the
they have
capabilities
secured
we
access
need
rights
in the State
all over the
Department
world on
to
virtually
continue the
every
Global
continent.
Fragility Act's
They
work?
are predominant
Yes,
and or
let me add to
leading
that because it's a good
in their
example.
access.
Number
And
one,
it's one of the
part
points
of
of
the reason
frustration
just
that I
because we
have.
got rid of
You
a
go to a
office
country and you
named
see how
something
much
doesn't
money
mean the
we've given in
function goes away.
humanitarian
It means
aid,
that
but when
we
it
want
comes
to
to
drive that
rare
through the
earth
regional
mineral
bureau.
rights
So a
and
great example of
exploited,
global fragility.
rights to
I keep going
natural
back to this over
resources,
and over again.
it's all on the
It's serious.
Chinese side. So
And
where's the
if we
connection
don't-
between the
if
aid we
that
give
fragility
to
is
help
not
countries
addressed,
survive
there's
and the
going to
fact
be
that the
terror. There already
Chinese are
is.
going in
I mean,
and
ISIS is
somehow
already
from these
growing
governments,
there and
bribery
potentially
or
going even
otherwise,
more dangerous.
getting
If
a
there's
hold of all
civil
these
war in
rare earth
Syria,
minerals and
you're going
leases
to have
and
an
contracts
ungoverned
all
space
over the
where
place.
multiple groups
Not
are
just
gonna
in
break
Africa,
out, and not
Latin
just threaten the
America,
region, but
all
ultimately
over the place.
potentially the homeland.
The second is
So
processing.
it's a great example of
They
how global
process all these
fragility
rare earth elements.
can be applied to the
so
real
we are
world.
literally,
We have
if
to
they
do it very
decide one
quickly.
day we're going
We
to
have to
cut
be
the
able to
world
act
off,
quickly in this
and they
regard,
threaten to do so to some
which is
extent
one
with
of the
these
things
trade
we hope to do
negotiations,
by being able
you
to
won't be
drive
able to
this
build
down
an
to the
engine in
regional
this
and
country.
local
You won't be able to build a
I
rocket
also work closely
or any of the
with
things
Chairman
that we use in
Graham,
daily
with
life.
Chairman McCall,
This is a
with
very
Ranking Member
dangerous
Meeks,
situation that's
and over
developed
100
that has to be addressed
co-sponsors
as
of both
well.
parties,
A lot of it will
to
require
enact the U.S.
domestic
Foundation for International
changes in our own
Conservation.
country and
It was
building up our
enacted
own
through the
domestic
NDAA.
capabilities,
There's
for
funding,
example, to
allocated
refine
to it.
rare earth minerals and to process,
You
but also
stated
just to
in your
make things.
confirmation on January
Pharmaceuticals,
15th
another
that this
dangerous
was the sort
imbalance.
of
We were,
public-private
all this talk about
partnership,
them getting close to the
that
Europeans. They're
struck you as
dumping on the
deserving of
European
support.
market. They're dumping electric
And I would
cars.
hope
They're
you would
dumping
move
all
quickly
kinds
to
of products because they're
execute,
overproducing. They don't
creating it. It
consume.
simply
So they
requires
dump
your
all these
signature,
products onto the European
and obligating
marketplace.
the funds
But you know what the
appointing
Europeans
the
are
board.
very concerned about, the
Chairman Graham
Italians
and
in
I are also
particular.
working
They
on a
used to
similar
lead the
bill
world
that
in
would address
pharmaceuticals,
food
at least
insecurity,
in the
again through a public-private
precursors
partnership,
and
a
the key elements
foundation
and the basic
that
ingredients.
would
Now
rely
the
on
Chinese
as much
dominate
private
80-something
sector
percent
funding
of that
and
industry.
philanthropy
They could cut
as
off our
government
medicine.
funding.
So I think when you
Do you
talk
still
about energy,
support
I
these
could apply that
foundations,
to
and
a
is this
host of
something you look
critical
forward to
industries in
working
the
with?
We'll
21st
get you an
century.
answer. I mean,
If
we'll
we
get
don't
you a
address that
decision on that very
imbalance,
quickly, which is
which is
what
what we're
we're
hoping to
looking
do
for,
with
is
some of
us to go
the
through and
trade
try to
proposals, but
implement the
also
law.
domestic
Yes, I
matters that
recall
the
the plan
administration is
correctly.
taking
We'll
on.
get to
We're
that
going to be in
fairly
real
quickly.
tough
We've
shape
been,
here very
we've got a lot
soon if we're
going
not
on over
already.
the last 4 months, but we'll
Thank you
get
very much,
to
Mr.
it,
Secretary.
including 100 and
I see
something
my time
reports
is
that
up,
we
but
inherited that
I
were
look forward to
overdue. We're
continuing
working through
to
those as
talk with you
well.
about how we can
But
create
because
this
you raised
all
it here today, if you
society
give me a
strategy
few
to
days,
be
I'll
able
get you
to fight back against communist China, because you
action
just
on
laid
it.
out a lot of the
Thank you.
things that we're at risk
We
at.
have spoken
and
about the
we have to
MCC,
have a
the
way
Millennium
to be able to
Challenge
push back on them
Corporation
so
is
that
a
they
Bush-era
don't
initiative
decide
that
to
used
try to take
metrics
Taiwan
and
by force, to
accountability,
try to do an energy
working
quarantine,
against
which
corruption
could lead
and in
to
long-term
a war which
partnership
would be
with
devastating
countries
for everybody.
to
Mr.
give them an
Thank you.
alternative to
Sobering
Chinese
analysis of,
financing,
where
as
we
you've
are
described
on
it, and I agree, debt trap
supply chain.
financing. There's current
Senator
compacts active
Thank you,
in
Mr.
countries
Chairman,
like
ranking
Indonesia, the
member.
Solomon
Thank you,
Islands,
Secretary
Nepal,
Rubio. Look
Kiribati,
forward to
where
2
it
sessions
gives
together today. This
transparency,
afternoon, you'll be in front of the
and cost
Appropriations
sharing.
Subcommittee. And
You
I
are
think
the
there's
chair
going
of
to
the
be some
board
themes
of the
across
Millennium
both
Challenge
of these.
Corporation.
First,
I understand from
I think
our
we
discussion
all
this
agree
morning that you're
that
aware
China
it's
poses
in
our
some
single
transition.
greatest geopolitical threat,
Can you just
and that we
confirm
have
it's
no
going through
choice but
reform
to
and
deter
will not
China
be
across
shut
the
down
board
wholesale?
and to
Yeah, I can
outcompete
confirm.
China.
We're on the board. We don't
Senator
operate
Ricketts
it,
and I
obviously.
just
We're on the
traveled
board,
to
but
the
it's not a
Philippines
State
and
Department
Taiwan,
function. We are one of the
and
board
saw
members. I'll be the
directly
chair.
the challenges that we face
and
there
actually, our
and
deputy, Chris
regionally.
Landau, is serving in
And
that
you've
role
recently had
when I'm
some
not available
significant
to be at
successes.
these
The
meetings
DRC,
and so forth.
Rwanda,
My understanding
peace
is that the latest
transition,
updates that I've gotten with the work
avoidance
that's
of
being done
escalation in
is it is
India and
undergoing a
Pakistan,
reform
the
effort,
opening towards Syria.
or streamline effort.
But
not
I
a
also
takedown
frankly
effort.
think
I
that
think it
there's
would
been a
be
real
an
lack of
unforced error
coordination
for
and
us
some
to
serious
hand
harm
away
to our standing in the
the
world with
relationships
some
and
of the
competition
countries
with
that we
China
have worked most
that are
closely
metrics-based
with
and
over
transparent
decades.
that the MCC
The
has put in place.
Doge-driven,
So I hope to work with you on that.
abrupt
Last,
and largely
your
illegal
testimony highlights in
cancellation
America
of billions
First
of dollars
Opportunity
of
Fund as a
contracts
more
for humanitarian
flexible
relief
and
and aid,
responsive account
and
that
the
will
disrespect
address
and the dismissal
waste and
of
foreign
thousands of
assistance and be
AID
more
staff
agile.
and our
But
NGO
at least
partners
as I see it,
stands in
your
sharp
proposal,
contrast to the
the
state
account replaces
reorganization
$9 billion
process
of programs
you just
with a $3
presented on
billion
in your
account.
following.
to
You've
cover
submitted
everything
plans
from
and proposals.
countering the
We're having
PRC,
a conversation.
Russia,
You're going to
aiding
send a
Jordan and
congressional
others.
notification.
Could you just
We're going to
briefly
have a
describe,
hearing. That's
how
the
you
way that the
imagine that
reforming
math
of
working and
USAID
how
could
this
have
fund
and
being
should have
sufficient,
happened.
to meet a wide menu
I just,
of needs.
at the outset,
Well, part
had
of
to
it is
say,
we found that some of these
as someone
programs
who spent
underneath it
15 years
they were
traveling the
scattered,
world,
some of them were duplicative,
visiting both our partners
there were
and
some
allies,
inefficiencies.
looking
So
at
we truly believe,
independent
now,
or
what the right number
semi-independent
is,
agencies
obviously,
like the
that's what we'll have to work
MCC and the
with you on, but we
DFC
truly
and
believe
their
that we
role,
can deliver
and visiting
the
NGO
same- on
partners
the
and the
same goals
USAID.
for substantially
I reject the
less
broad
than what
characterization
those
of them
combined
by Elon Musk and Doge as
funds or
criminals
projects
who
would
were
have cost.
wasting taxpayer
But what
money.
it's going to enable us
You've
to do
heard
is-
across
is,
all of
to
us
ensure that
support for
assistance funds are
PEPFAR,
directed towards the
concern about
highest priority
humanitarian
projects
relief,
that we may have
and the
on any
vision
given
that this
basis,
is a key
on any
strategic
given moment,
asset
given
for us.
global events that are
It's
happening.
my
It
hope that we'll
provides
work
enough-
together to actually make real a more effective, focused, and sustainable foreign aid component to what STAID does, and sustaining organizations that we help build together, like the MCC, the DFC, and the Global Fragility Act. So let me turn to this for a moment. My colleague, Senator Shaheen, made reference to places in the world where the CCP and the PRC have stepped forward. I agree, they're never going to deliver humanitarian aid the way we used to, and with the breadth, depth, and effectiveness that we have. But I also think they're taking advantage of the opening to say that we're not reliable, that our decades-long partnerships can't be sustained and extended, and to question our motivations. So I think we need to step out quickly to avoid creating a big hole in our credibility globally. Let me just on a few questions with Ukraine. The previous administration worked closely with our partners and allies in Europe on sanctions to close, to extend designations. Are you continuing to do that?
Work with our allies?
To tighten the
Yeah,
sanctions?
so, well, first of all, the Europeans have their own set of sanctions, and we've coordinated with them very closely. In fact, the president had a call with at least 6 leaders from Europe yesterday. I had meetings with what we call the Quint that include Italy,
the Reagan buildup, about 6% of GDP. It worked. They didn't want to mess with us because they knew how strong we were going to be. And an equal partner, much less costly, is the soft power side. I think, I don't care what you call it or how you reorganize, but the basic functions that soft power provides are extremely important. You get a lot of friends for not much money. And we're being outmaneuvered, as you well know, in country after country after country by the People's Republic of China, who are effectively playing in ways that are more effective than we are. So if you can figure out how to way to reorganize it and call it whatever you will, that role is extremely important. How are foreigners looking at us right now? I think they think we're losing interest. The previous administration didn't have a single budget for defense that even kept up with inflation. And unfortunately, because of the continuing resolution this year, it looks like more of the same. So it strikes me, no matter how well the tariffs, for example, work out, that the perception at the beginning of this administration is that we want to fight with our allies and figure out some way to make an agreement with our enemies, which brings me to Ukraine. And I think the America that I believe in, and most of us believe in, would find no equivalence between the Russians and the Ukrainians. And so I'm hoping as this administration moves forward, it doesn't end up not facing the actual enemies we have now, North Korea, China, Russia, Iran's proxies, by working with our allies to stand up to them. Just to take a specific example of how soft power makes a difference, look at a country like Burma that you've had an interest in, and I have too over the years. Horrible place run by despicable people. Lots of storms and problems of one kind or another. The Chinese are in there just operating effectively. And we, because of not honoring contracts and some of the other things that we were doing to try to be helpful, just completely getting outmaneuvered. So, having had to endure that, I'd be interested in your observations about what you think about soft power and how important it is to this country's future.
Sure. I mean, first of all, I think soft power has the Department of State ultimately is a soft power entity. I mean, it's the Department of Peace. The Department of War is a Department of Defense. Our job is to try to prevent them. And so I do think that the model you've outlined, especially during the Cold War, was quite useful because during that time, that model served to keep societies from collapsing and becoming susceptible to Marxist regimes taking them over. That was the biggest fear during the Cold War, was that governments with high levels of poverty would be attracted to a Marxist revolution that would overthrow an allied government and create another satellite state for the Soviet Union. We live in a different world today. The threats look different. In some cases, fragility is still a factor, but it is largely a factor that will lead to either a costly humanitarian crisis and in some cases operating in safe haven spaces for radical jihadists to threaten us here at home. So the concept remains true. How it's applied is what has changed because I think the context, and in that context, no matter how much even with these reductions that are proposed before you, we would still be the single largest foreign aid donor on the planet by multiples. I mean, no one even comes close. I think Germany was second, if I recall the last time I checked, and it's not even close. That remains the case. What we have to do now is apply that soft power to the places where it matters most to our national interests and to the programs that can make the biggest difference, the biggest impact in furthering our national interests. I think it's possible to both be a humanitarian and at the same time further the national interest. And there are cases where perhaps there isn't going to be a national interest argument. We just do it because we don't want people to die or we want to help alleviate suffering. The case of Burma is an example. It wasn't just a reduction in aid because we had teams on the ground. It was actual local authorities that prevented us from getting involved or allowing certain aid to be distributed because they were in the middle of their own conflicts internally in the midst of it. So some of these environments where we're trying to deliver aid are quite challenging. Even if we provide the money, we struggle to get it to the recipients because of some local impediment on the ground that could include, for example, in the case of Haiti, armed gangs that will hijack humanitarian shipments and steal them. Just steal them as soon as they come into the country. So it's not that we care less about Haiti, but I certainly don't think foreign aid should be going into the hands of a Haitian gang and being stolen from the people that we're intending to benefit.
Senator Merkley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And second chance to ask some questions of you today. Thank you for testifying in multiple committees. Back in March, you noted that you had revoked some 300 student visas using the 1952 Immigration and Nationality Act, which specifically says the Secretary of State can revoke a visa if an alien's activity in the U.S. would have a serious adverse foreign policy consequence. And that issue of 300, what's the number up to now? How many visas have you revoked?
I don't know the latest count, but we probably have more to do.
Can you give us an estimate?
Probably in the thousands at this point, depending. Not all of them are under that statute. Some are people. So there's two visa revocations.
I don't want to go into SEVIS. It's a separate issue. And
No. They're related, but we can't conflate them because they're two different. One is the one you've decided, national interest of the United States, Some of the visa revocations are happening because somebody violated the terms of their visa. They dropped out of school or they got convicted of a crime or some criminal investigation.
okay.
Those are separate from what you've said.
So 300 in March, but now 1,000. How many under this 1952 Act?
I'd have to
Roughly?
get you a good answer, but probably under 1,000. But I'd have to get
Can
you
you
the right
follow up
answer.
and
I don't
get
want
us-
to
get us
speculate
an
about the
answer?
exact number.
And I'll tell you, this particular thing, it does bother me. And you testified in Louisiana Immigration Court in a pretty expansive interpretation of that 52 law, saying that it could be for citizens, it extends to any non-citizen for past, current, or expected beliefs, statements, or association. And that expected really caught my mind. This power rests solely, this 1950 law rests solely with you. And your interpretation sounds like you're saying if you, the Secretary of State, think you expect someone's beliefs or statements, past, current, or future, then you can toss their visa.
The visa is not a right, it's a privilege.
All right, so I will just say, and then I'm going to go on to another topic. I profoundly disagree. The Fifth Amendment is very powerful in protecting citizens and non-citizens alike with due process. I know this will be adjudicated in court, but the idea that one individual could on their opinion of someone's future activity or expected activity, that one individual, being our Secretary of State, can toss somebody's visa, seems to me an extraordinary violation of due process. I won't ask you to defend it now. I'm happy to put it in writing for you to give us a follow-up and explain it better. But I do think it's a fundamental attack on freedom because due process is the guardian of the gate to keep a government from taking away people's life or liberty, and liberty is what happens when you take away a visa without due process. I want to turn to the issue my colleagues have mentioned, and that is there is a legal way to restructure the Secretary of State's department and USAID specifically. But what we saw on February 3rd was Elon Musk say, over the weekend, I tossed USAID into the wood chipper. That's a pretty profound weekend. It didn't involve consultation with Congress over the consequences. There was no rewriting of the law. There was no discussion of what funds could be delayed, frozen, redirected. And the result is different groups have estimated how many people have died to date and will die over the course of a year or a prolonged period as a result of the destruction of the weekend of February 1st and 2nd. Did Elon Musk have your support in putting USAID into the wood chipper?
Well, I don't think that's a X post, or what I guess you're imagining a social media post, is not a government act.
Not at all. That's a quote. That's what he said.
Yeah, it's okay. Well, that's what he said, but that's not ultimately what happened as acting director. Is all these decisions
Did his actions have your full support?
The ones that I signed off on, yes, which is the ones that happened.
Of what Elon Musk did with USAID?
No, but understand, these are contracts. All these
contracts. Did he do it without or with your support? That's what I'm trying to understand.
Well, not my support, it was my actions.
His Doge team did a lot of cancellations very, very quickly, and it fired a lot of people. It wasn't clear to me whether that had your support or not.
The Doge team didn't do anything. I did it. I was the one that made the decisions. I went through contracts, literally spreadsheets, line by line. I remember being in a hotel, I believe in Guatemala, going through line by line on spreadsheets of contracts that were canceled, contracts that were approved, contracts that were amended. These are all contracts.
So in that case, I'll put the responsibility with you since you're taking credit for it rather than with Elon Musk. But the Boston School of Public Health has a kind of a website where they post their estimated deaths as a result of the actions that were taken to dismantle USAID. And they're updating it continuously. So you go to it, the numbers keep changing. They have a one-year estimate, but they also have what they estimate has happened to today. And as of today, they estimate that the actions taken in putting USAID in the wood chipper, child malnutrition, 53,500 more deaths. And I'm rounding off because the numbers are continuously changing. Child diarrhea, 45,400 more deaths. Child pneumonia, 59,200 more deaths. Malaria, 25,100 more deaths. So what happened that weekend has resulted in the death of hundreds of thousands of children. And the estimate for the end of this year is much, much higher. This happened because the law was not followed for consultation with Congress, analysis, bringing in experts, holding hearings. How do you kind of accept what you just put forward, that it was your action to cancel these contracts? Your contracts, in this fashion, freezing fund, firing individuals, has resulted in the death of hundreds of thousands of children.
That's false. That's fake. That's just not true. That's a study based on if we canceled every one of these programs permanently. Okay, and I'm reading it right here because I'm glad you brought it up. It assumes a near total freeze in U.S. foreign aid for HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, and other diseases. There is not a total freeze. 85% of PEPFAR recipients are receiving their care right now. But the numbers you're saying, those aren't real numbers. I understand that's what the school said in the worst case dramatic scenario, and even then I think it's exaggerated. But there's just no evidence of the fact that, I don't remember what the numbers are, 100,000 children have starved to death in the last 4 months because the United States made reductions to USAID. Well, that first of all is pretty atrocious. That would mean that nobody else in the world is doing anything. We're taking care of the entire planet?
Well, I must say, I think your response is not fit with what the published results were, but there's other groups that have done this as well. There's a study in Nature with healthcare experts from a whole number of leading universities, and they said basically if you shut down USAID, and it may not be fully shut down, but my colleagues who follow this closely say, it's 80, 90% shut down. And Nature study, or published in Nature, said, look, because of what has happened, we will see some 15 million additional deaths over 15 years just from HIV, producing 14 million orphans, and another 10 million people, children and adults, dying from malnutrition, tuberculosis, diarrhea, malaria, and other diseases. And there's even higher numbers from the Friends of the Global Fight Against AIDS. I think it's this rash shutdown without due process of law, that is not coming and doing it in collaboration with rewriting the law, freezing funds, canceling these contracts without consultation, that you have exacted enormous harm on the world.
Again, those numbers you're saying are staggering and unrealistic. The reality of it is, if what you're saying is that unless the United States funds foreign aid at these levels in perpetuity, the world's going to suffer 15 million deaths in 15 years, and every country should be voting for everything we want at the UN.
The number was 15,
because we're basically funding and feeding the world.
15 million in the study of Nature, yes, from the shutdown of these programs.
Thank you. Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you. Secretary Rubio, welcome. Welcome back to Capitol Hill. Let me ask you to tell us, as the State Department prepares to undertake restructuring of its humanitarian and aid operations, where does food assistance fit in within the department's strategic priorities, and in which office will state place those programs?
Well, it'll be under our director, the new directorate that will oversee both human rights and humanitarian affairs and foreign aid. The only ones that are going to be separated from that is military sales and military financing, but the primary driver of our humanitarian assistance, food assistance, medicine will be through the new bureau that will handle that. It'll be a Senate-confirmed position as well that will respond and answer to that they will answer to. And it will be a priority, but it will be structured in a way to deliver the most amount of money, or the most amount of aid at the least amount of cost in the most effective way.
Do you have a person in mind as this position is in the process of being filled?
That will require Senate confirmation. I don't believe that position has been filled yet. There's someone acting in a temporary capacity, in an acting capacity at the moment. But we will have to come back to you to find a nominee that will run that.
Let me highlight a couple of food programs. Food for Peace and what we call Dole McGovern nutrition program are two long-standing initiatives with deep roots in my home state of Kansas. These programs, in my view, are critical tools in the fight against global hunger, the moral aspect of that, but also vital to Kansas farmers, to American agriculture producers who help deliver. And this program started with a Kansas farmer who felt compelled to do something with excess grain piled on the ground at a time when people across the globe were still starving and hungry. I understand there were findings of mismanagement at USAID. I look forward to working with you and this subcommittee to make sure that mismanagement is something that stays out of our delivery of food aid. I did join with Senator Hoeven and Senator Marshall in legislation that would transfer the administration of Food for Peace to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I have some sense that you are supportive of that concept. I have some sense that the Secretary of Agriculture is supportive of that concept. I have some sense that the Office of Management and Budget is supportive of that concept. This is my first opportunity to have a conversation with you. Tell me how I can be helpful to you and to the department in the cause of Food for Peace and its future.
Well, again, that's still, obviously, there's legislation out there that's pending on it, but I would argue that it is what you have described as the new arrangement under the Department of Agriculture would generally align with the idea that we want to, because no matter what, we still have to work with them on this program. It would align towards removing one more layer of government that allow us to both identify recipients and delivery mechanisms quicker and more effectively. So generally, your perceptions are correct. We're very open to that transition being done. Obviously, whether it's done statutorily or otherwise, it's something would be open to, because we think it has the potential to deliver assistance much quicker, much faster, much more efficiently, and perhaps to a broader set of people.
Mr. Secretary, Food for Peace, the Dole-McGovern. Let me ask about McGovern-Dole. Any observations in regard to that program?
We haven't made any determinations, but I would imagine it would fold under, if it was under our responsibilities, it would fold under the same bureau that's handling what we call the life-saving assistance or humanitarian assistance.
My take from your answer is that there is a role for food aid programs to continue to exist, to be administered. The goal is to figure out how to reduce the bureaucracy and how to deliver more aid for the same bigger bang for the buck.
We're not stopping foreign aid. I mean, we're going to continue foreign aid, and at levels as generous, more generous than any other country in the world, and most countries in the world combined. The question is, how can we deliver it more effectively and ensure that it is aligned with our foreign policy priorities? But in the case of food aid, as an example, there's no goal to end it or to stop doing this kind of work. It is more about how can we deliver it more efficiently and effectively and quickly, and in ways that are aligned with our broader foreign policy, and to empower. Again, I keep going back to this point because it's really important to make, empowering our regional bureaus to drive these programs, to identify chronic or critical needs, whether they're acute or chronic, and allow us to quickly operationalize it, as opposed to having a standoff bureau that views the whole entire world holistically. We are able to drive this at the local and regional level, where they know what the priorities are and can drive this aid quickly.
Mr. Secretary, among the many things that you've said in this hearing this afternoon, that's one that certainly caught my attention as having merit. Get the process where it's the closest to the crisis, the emergency, the facts are better known, and implemented more closely to home in a foreign country. Let me highlight one more feeding program, and this one's about the future. There's a program called Feed the Future, in which research is done in agriculture designed to figure out how to produce more food, in other words, greater efficiency, and a food that's needed in countries that have different kinds of opportunities to feed themselves. How can we use the powerhouse of American agricultural research to find ways to better allow other countries not only receive food aid from us, but also to grow their own?
I think imagine if you're an ambassador in a country that has a chronic food shortage, and you're somehow able to provide them American ingenuity that allows them to produce more food at a lower cost using less land or less facility. That's an extraordinary thing to offer as part of our toolbox. But those are unique opportunities that probably exist in some places and not in others. And the ability to identify from the ground level, have an ambassador, an embassy, or a regional bureau identify that as both a need and an opportunity, and then us to operationalize it, is exactly the kind of nimble programming that we want to be able to do. But I see great benefit in the ability of us to allow, and it's also, by the way, the kind of foreign aid that ends. Because once they have acquired the capacity to do it, it's helped our companies to find a place where they can deploy it. It's helped them to develop independence. And it creates good faith among the nations in the future. That is part of the soft power that Senator McConnell was talking about a moment ago.
Mr. Secretary, I think it's the components that I've outlined are three circumstances. You meet the needs of someone in a crisis today, but the long-term goal is to help people around the globe be self-sufficient. countries to care for themselves and reduce the role, perhaps, of the United States in that effort. And I would highlight for what you just said, the program that provides the agricultural research to accomplish what you described as a positive development is a program called Food for Peace. I said that wrong. It's a program called Feed the Future. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Murray.
Thank you very much, Chair Graham. Senator Schatz, welcome to your new role. I look forward to working with both of you. Secretary Rubio, I am deeply concerned that you have overseen a systemic campaign to dismantle USAID, impound billions of dollars that this committee actually provided, and unilaterally remake the Department of State without the slightest bit of concern that you lack the authority to do that without Congress. It has created chaos, it's caused preventable deaths across the globe, and it has undermined American leadership. As Ranking Member Schatz noted, what you've done is outright illegal, a complete violation of bipartisan appropriation laws, the Impoundment Control Act, and the Anti-Deficiency Act. Within hours of taking office, President Trump halted all foreign aid in flagrant defiance of the law. Now, under your watch, Secretary Rubio, that freeze was implemented with chaos and cruelty. And then you illegally shuttered USAID, placing everyone on leave, halting life-saving work, literally locking people out of the building and out of their devices, even in dangerous corners of our world. You paid people not to work, abandoned our partners across the globe, and chaotically recalled global staff, putting more than 1,600 Americans who served our country abroad in limbo. And when you shut down the USAID payment system, you even refused to pay for services provided before the illegal freeze. You fought all the way to the Supreme Court, against paying for services U.S. businesses already rendered with funding that Congress already provided. And I know you know, Mr. Secretary, but you lost. And I assume you need the reminder because to this day, you have not made all the payments that are required by our nation's highest court, and as a result, American companies continue to lay off American workers. And by the way, you do continue to lose in court, including just yesterday over your move to illegally replace the U.S. Institute of Peace Leadership, and in recent cases over international broadcasting. Now, eventually, Mr. Secretary, you sent Congress notice of your intent to collapse the USAID into state. Only you didn't consult with this committee. That's required by law. It came without justification, also required by law, and it came long after USAID was reduced to rubble. So sadly, disregard for our laws and values, to me, has sort of become a pattern of your tenor, revoking visas when someone writes an op-ed you don't like, or reaching a secret deal to use taxpayer dollars to jail U.S. residents in a notorious foreign prison, no due process, or pointlessly leaving food assistance to rot in storage. Actually, in Dubai, we now have 500 tons of high-energy biscuits that expire in July. They're bought, they're shipped, they're stored, all at taxpayer expense. But you've condemned them to waste, and that is one example of many. Now, another pattern that I'm deeply worried about is transparency. We have pressed you for information. Our staffs have sent you countless emails and briefing requests so we can do our job here. There are hundreds of unanswered requests and no effort to address them. And Mr. Secretary, that's got to change. Even your plan to reorganize the State Department came with no information on the 270 offices you are moving to eliminate, the proposed layoffs, or how USAID would be merged into state. I won't ask you whether impounding billions of dollars is legal. It is not. I won't ask you whether it's efficient to pay people not to work or fire them without determining staffing needs. But, and I won't ask you if cutting 91% of our counter-narcotic and law enforcement programs make us safer, abruptly abandoning agreements with allies makes us stronger, or ceding our global leadership to China makes us more prosperous. Of course not. We know that. We have worked together for years in a bipartisan way to advance U.S. interests and fund those programs. So with respect to my colleagues, how long are we going to sit here and watch this silently? Are we going to roll over as Trump tramples our laws and undermines our U.S. leadership burns down what we have spent decades building, and let millions of people across our globe suffer and die? Or are we going to stand up, push back, assert our constitutional power of the purse? And to my colleagues on both sides, this is the moment to decide whether this committee continues to be a powerful bipartisan force, a force that I think we've all been proud of for a very long time, a force that is focused on safety and economic strength and national security, focused on leading the world in research and development and countering China and others with our soft power and our military power. Every single member of this committee knows what we are risking by letting this administration tear down so much. On USAID and other programs, we can always talk about how we can make things work better and other reforms. I don't think any of us are opposed to any of those considerations. We have been doing that in a bipartisan way for a long time. But that's not actually what Trump's fiscal year 2026 budget proposes. Now, Mr. Secretary, I know you would like to give a 5-minute speech back to me, but I only have a few seconds left, and I do need some information from you. As I said, we have asked and have not gotten. Can you tell me, will you share the text and details with my staff of your agreement with El Salvador and any other similar arrangements, including the funding details that we need to have?
Well, first, I'd like to respond to your 7-minute speech, which is primarily, I disagree like 99% of it. It's just not true. We've done nothing that's illegal. We've been in over 600 briefings to Congress. We've asked questions. We've answered questions repeatedly. We get hundreds of questions a day. We respond them as quickly as possible. And your characterization of the moves that we made
Mr. Secretary, I would
false.
just tell you, we are here because we need the information so that we can write our budget and on a bipartisan.
Well, you'll have the information you need to write a budget.
Okay, so will we get the details on the El Salvador arrangement? Yes or no?
Well, which Salvador arrangement?
Your agreement that you've made with them about.
Well, what agreement? The president of El Salvador agreed to take in 250 gangbangers, and we sent them.
Funding details we have not gotten. We need to see what the costs are.
Well, we haven't funded that. We've provided them law enforcement assistance. I know you just claimed that we cut all this law enforcement assistance. We provided El Salvador and other countries law enforcement assistance. They have the right to spend that money any way they wish. But they did us a big favor. They took 250 dangerous, trained out. We didn't deport any U.S. residents. No U.S. residents were reported.
I'm not going to argue with you on that point.
Well, it's not an argument, but don't say we deported U.S. residents, because we didn't. I don't deport anybody.
I'm not asking.
But we didn't deport U.S. residents.
I'm asking you whether we can see the details of the arrangements, including the funding details.
I'm giving you the details. The arrangements are we provide law enforcement funding to El Salvador, among other countries. How they choose to spend that money internally is up to them. But I can tell you.
Can you give me the details on the 200-plus offices you're proposing to
Sure, we've
eliminate?
provided that.
We need that. Can I get your commitment to give us those?
It's part of our reorg.
How about the details and justifications of your proposed rescissions from programs you claim are out of alignment with administration priorities? Are we going to get the details of that, funding priorities?
On rescissions and empowerment and things of this nature, that's obviously an OMB function, and I would talk to them about that in regard to what's going to go on with that money. I can tell you the contracts we canceled, and I can list to you the contracts we canceled and the rationale why, because I went through them myself.
You get those to us like today? So
the contracts?
Yes, and the funding arrangements that you've made. That's what I'm asking for.
Funding arrangements with who?
For any of the rescissions, for any of the funding, for any of the multiple congressional directives that you have given out, so that we as an appropriations committee can make our funding decisions.
Sure, you're going to have all that information when you put together a budget.
Thank you. I enjoyed that. So to my friends on the other side, I've been very supportive of this account. But USAID is collapsed, and if you're looking for somebody to blame, look in the mirror. Look at Samantha Powers. I've taken political fire, like most of us have, on our side for trying to be involved in the world. But here's what AID did that's led to what he's doing. $70,000 grant for DEI musical production in Ireland. $69,000 for dance classes in Wuhan, China. $47,000 grant for transgender opera in Colombia. You screwed it up. You took the goodwill of people over here and you pissed it away because you turned over the keys to the kingdom to a bunch of crazy liberals. I can go on. $2.5 million for electric vehicles in Vietnam. $2 million for Moroccan pottery classes and promotion. $2 million for sex changes and LGBT activism in Guatemala. No more from you. None. The reason this thing is dead and never come back is because what you did, the Democratic Party did.
You want me to follow that?
As you wish.
Yeah. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. During your confirmation hearing, you stated preventing crisis is a lot cheaper and a lot better than dealing with the crisis after the fact, which I agree wholeheartedly. In 21, the State Department's budget was roughly $41 billion. Today, of 2025, the budget has almost doubled to $81.67 billion. Is our world safer over the last 4 years than it was when Trump was first in office?
Is it safer today than it was?
No. Before Trump came back, the last 4 years underneath Biden's administration, the State Department almost doubled in their appropriated funds.
Well, I think
over those 4 years, did we become a safer nation? Did the world become safer?
No, I don't think I think the last 4 years have become more destabilizing.
Right.
Assign blame where one may want to, but the world is less stable. We have an all-out conflict that at any given moment threatens to spiral into a broader one in the Middle East. We have the Russia-Ukraine war that started in 2022 and has continued to this present day. We've shown China is becoming increasingly aggressive in the Indo-Pacific, particularly in the South China Sea, against both the Philippines, Taiwan, and other claimants in the region. So, and by the way, we experienced a mass migration crisis, not just here in the Western Hemisphere, but also because of what's happened in Africa and the Middle East and Europe. So for all those reasons, no, we're not safer.
So it's safe to say that we threw money at it and it didn't help. And so now that we're trying to get it back under control, for some reason the Democrats are throwing an absolute, as I would say, a ringtail fit. Because we're doing better with the money we sent. There's no room to cut. We've doubled their budget in 4 years. And we have wars upon wars and rumors on rumors of wars. We have Haiti that's absolutely a crap show. We have China that has increased their influence all around our borders. Literally, if you start looking at their influence in Canada, in Mexico, and all over Central and South America, it hasn't worked. We have Africa that is a complete mess. We have a war going on in Ukraine. I'm sure that, that wouldn't have happened if we actually had strong leadership there. We have a war going on in Israel. And what have we done? We've thrown money at what? Going back to the chairman's point of view about USA aid, $73 million spent on DEI. $73 million spent on DEI last year. Because it made us safer? Are we serious? I mean, we have a $37 trillion debt. When are we going to start cutting? At what area are we going to start cutting? And now all of a sudden we're trying to actually make changes and get refocused on mission statement? Sir, I appreciate what you're trying to do. Can you kind of walk me through what your end goal is?
Well, first of all, in the aid portion of it, these are some of the contracts we canceled. I can't go through all of them, and people say what they want, but some of them make no sense to me. I mean,
I'd say a lot of them makes no sense.
Well, I mean, for example, $32 million to the Prague Civil Society Center. I don't know what that is. I mean, obviously we looked at the contract and we didn't approve it, but it didn't make a lot of sense to me. $14 million for improving public procurement in Serbia. I'm sure that improving public procurement in Serbia is not. Maybe it's a really good thing, but I don't know if that's in our national interest to put that kind of money into that. And that's the kinds of programs that we're talking about. It's not all the outrageous things. There are other things that are involved in this that you look at and say, okay, well, maybe this is a worthy program, but not for us. It's not something that we should be. $1.5 million for voter confidence in Liberia. $14 million for social cohesion in Mali.
$2.5 million for inclusive democracies in Southern Africa, $47 million for something called improving learning outcomes in Asia. Again, these things sound really good, I guess, I mean, as noble causes, but can we continue to afford to prioritize these sorts of projects when we have so many other needs, both domestically and abroad? And so our hope is to bring about some sanity to how this money is spent, so when people say we're still spending more money than anybody in the world on foreign aid, but it is being directed in a way that makes sense, it's actually furthering our national interest. And that's what we hope to be able to do. And that's really the end goal here. It's not so much a cutting exercise. There may be savings involved. But the more important thing is that we get better outcomes from it, that we feel like our foreign aid and our giving is aligned with our foreign policy objectives in a specific region, in a specific country.
I think you said it best, national security interest, in words that maybe my colleagues from the other side wouldn't like to hear, but America first. Is it in our interest or is it not in our interest? And we're throwing so much wasteful taxpayer dollars out the door that even the taxpayers want accountability, and which they should. And that is what this administration is bringing, and that's what you're bringing. Now, you know, actually, I don't know if my time's almost up or not, because everybody's been going way over.
It is.
No, everybody else has been going way over.
Yeah.
And so I just want to say, what's the difference between a visa and LPR?
An LPR is someone who's admitted into the country.
Legal permanent residence?
Right.
And a visa is what?
A visa is a guest.
A guest, right. They're treated a little bit different underneath.
Well, they're actually treated different from the very beginning, because we deny visas every day all over the world for all kinds of reasons. But I guess there's this attitude that once you get a visa, now you've been enshrined with some sort of privilege that is unrevocable. And the truth of the matter is, we should be able to, we will continue to, if you were going to do things that if we knew you were going to do it, we wouldn't let you into this country. If you do it once you're here, we're going to take away the visa.
You're a guest. That's right. One thing I want to add is I have a special interest in Haiti. My family and our companies, prior to me getting into Congress and after coming into Congress, have invested a lot into missions throughout Haiti, and it's becoming a failed state. I would really like to work with your office in seeing how we can assist through individuals that we have contacts with ways that we might be able to assist on going forward and putting, hopefully, the right people in place. I've literally spent years dealing with Haiti, and I hate to say it's a failed state, but it will be, and who's going to backfill that is going to be China. And so we'd really like to work with you moving forward on that, sir.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
And I agree, Senator Mullen. We don't talk enough about Haiti. It's in our backyard, and it's not becoming a failed state. It is a failed state. Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Senator Graham. Let me personally thank you for your leadership on this subcommittee. We may disagree on some things and some projects, but I believe you've been honest in working with us in the past, and I look forward to that continuing. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you. 99-0. That's a pretty good score coming out of the Senate. I'd like to ask you about Gaza, if I can. They anticipate a famine is underway in Gaza. In the next few days, they anticipate 14,000 infants and children will die. Israel has decided to change its policy to release baby food into Gaza. I just have to ask you, as you must see the same pictures I do, you can't escape them, of these kids with pencil-thin arms, with ribs you can count, spindly legs, who are just on the cusp of death because of the policy of Israel in dealing with Hamas. Now, let me make it clear for the record. I support Israel. I believe what happened October 7th was an act of terrorism, unforgivable act of terrorism, and they have a right to defend themselves, period. Number two, I believe Hamas is a terrorist organization. I do not believe that every Palestinian in Gaza territory is a member of Hamas or sympathetic with that band of terrorists, but many of them are. So today, 3 countries, France, United Kingdom, and Canada, made a statement which I'd like to summarize. You probably know this already. They said the resumption of aid into Gaza by Israel wholly inadequate. The United Kingdom paused free trade talks with Israel and sanctioned Israeli settlers. And then this statement, joint message by these three countries, allies of the United States. If Israel does not cease the renewed military offensive and lift its restrictions on humanitarian aid, we will take further concrete action in response. Mr. Secretary, are we on the wrong side of history in watching this unfold and not responding as these three countries have?
Well, we're not prepared to respond the way these three countries have, but we are prepared to say, as we have, and I think the Israelis in their statements today acknowledged, have engaged with our Israeli partners over the weekend and the last few days about the need to resume humanitarian aid. We anticipate that those flows will increase over the next few days and weeks. It's important that that be achieved. I actually had an opportunity when I was in Rome on Sunday or Saturday to see Cindy McCain, as you know, is involved with the World Food Program, discuss their distribution systems. She outlined for me exactly how they would distribute food and how the program would work if it were to be restarted. So suffice it to say that we support 100% the fact that there can be no future in Gaza for the people of Gaza as long as Hamas is around. And by the way, in your comments that you made, I know many of you have noticed, there's been a growing number of anti-Hamas protests and demonstrations as well. So there are people there that understand that this is a root cause of it. That said, you have this acute, immediate challenge of food and aid not reaching people, and you have existing distribution systems that could get them there. So we have, and continue to work, even though I've been here in hearings all day, but continued to work with our Israeli partners and as I think they've acknowledged in the statement today that they've heard from us, to allow more aid in, because I believe they can achieve their objective of defeating Hamas while still allowing aid to enter in sufficient quantities.
I agree with you. I think what you just said should be our policy, but I don't think we should use these people, these Palestinians, particularly these children, as just a casualty of war. This is a designed attack by Israel into Gaza. This is a designed decision by Israel not to provide humanitarian aid, food, medicine, water. And we provide quite a bit of money to Israel for its own defense and for other purposes. Shouldn't we be more forthcoming to speak about this humanitarian crisis?
Yeah, I think there's two things that Israel has expressed, and I don't want to speak for them because they speak for often on this topic. The first is their complaints that humanitarian aid is often stolen and siphoned off by Hamas elements. Well, it has. There's no doubt that there has happened. That said, the question is whether it has to be. The question is there a way to reliably reach as many people as possible and prevent the humanitarian crisis you're describing, while not enriching Hamas or providing Hamas relief. And we believe there is a way to do it. And we want to be supportive of that way to do it. And we've encouraged them to do it in that way, and we think we've made progress.
Did you ask Cindy McCain whether Hamas was diverting food supplies from the people in Gaza?
We didn't discuss that. We talked mostly about, I wanted to get a description of what the distribution points look like. How can you get assistance to the most number of people as quickly as possible in an orderly way based on where they live and where they are in different parts of Gaza?
Is this an emergency humanitarian situation in your view?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think we all see the same images. The question that I had in my mind in meeting with her and discussing is, do we have the mechanisms in place to quickly start, if in fact an agreement could be reached to allow humanitarian aid to flow? Did we have the mechanics in place to allow the World Food Program and their contractors to go in and immediately begin to provide it? And she assured me that they do, that they could, because one of the arguments or one of the concerns that existed is that the organizations that could do the distribution were not on the ground or were not capable of starting so quickly. She assured us that they were.
If we have this in place, what are we waiting for? These children are dying.
It's my understanding, again, I've been here all day, but it's my understanding that starting yesterday and moving through the next few days, aid will increasingly flow in, and hopefully that will allow these programs to work.
I certainly hope so, too. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thanks, Senator Durbin. Senator Bozeman. Oh, by the way, today is Cindy's birthday. Happy birthday, Cindy, wherever you may be.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to have you, Mr. Secretary. We're very proud of you, but we do miss having you around very much. I want to follow up a little bit about some of the path that Senator Moran was going down about food aid. In the process of reworking the programs, could you speak to how the State Department is coordinating with other agencies like USDA regarding setting up a new foreign assistance framework? And can you also speak, I know you've been very, very supportive of the American farmer, as is the President, how that this can enhance American farmers markets?
Well, first of all, I think this committee probably understands it, but others perhaps don't fully appreciate. We actually do foreign aid across multiple other agencies as well. So USAID does some, HHS does some, so there are other agencies that do. So that's a process we intend to look at and see if there's some duplication there that we can avoid and perhaps increase our efficiency in regards to delivering services. In the case of food aid in particular, with Secretary Rollins, we've been in touch with her team, and obviously we've done a lot of reform and a lot of change over the last few months. So this is one that is a little further behind, but I think the intent is to find a way that we can leverage what USAID is already doing, USDA is already doing, to enhance how we provide food assistance around the world in a way that benefits the American farmer, but also fulfills our desire to provide assistance around the world where needed and where it furthers our national interest.
Good, very good. Let me talk to you a little bit about the Fulbright program. And the Fulbright alumni, 44 Fulbright alumni have served as heads of state and government. 89 foreign governments contribute over $90 million annually. I know in my travels, and you're traveling so extensively now and have been for many, many years, it seems like every time that you're in a foreign country and you're visiting with the cabinet members, half of them are Fulbright scholars, and they're very, very proud of it. 49 governments match or exceed the U.S. government's annual contribution. I guess the question is, would you be willing to work with us to find a solution that strengthens the program and yet fits into today's challenges, which are different than they have been in the past, but the opportunity for the leadership of these other countries across the ranks to have them such that they're very, very familiar with the United States in that way, I think is really invaluable.
Well, and I think that's most certainly going to be a part of our process. As you know, we're at the beginning of this appropriations process going into the new year. We have a submission we've made to you, a preliminary submission. Obviously, I served here long enough to know that you'll have your own set of ideas about what the priorities should be and what we should be looking to do, and we understand that, and we'll work very closely with you on those priorities, because in the end, we'll tell you what we need in order to run our agency, and then you'll tell us what we need as well. That's the way it worked in the 15 years I was here, 16. I imagine that's the way it'll continue to work. I do think ultimately what we want to do is share the same goal. And we owe you that document as a starting point. And I wanted to interlace it with the org chart. Again, I know some people don't want to talk about reorganization, but I do think they're intertwined and they're deeply important. Not that they don't want to talk about it, but they want to separate one from the other. But look, we're going to be engaged with you in this appropriations process because I think it's beneficial to us, but also because we have to, because ultimately you will write that. And I think the department will be stronger if you can pass an appropriations bill and get it through the other house and have it signed by the president. We want you to be able to pass an appropriations bill.
Yeah, very much. One of the things in traveling, you're there, you get the in-country team briefing and stuff, and you just wonder, what the State Department's doing to further U.S. economic interest, including advocating for U.S. businesses abroad. Can you tell us kind of what your ideas are in that regard?
Well, it's a mission that we have in this reorganization. The economics team will really focus on it, but it is a mission we have to try to connect American companies to business opportunities abroad. And in many of the countries around the world that you go to, particularly those that are developing, maybe not underdeveloped, but developing countries, they seek American expertise. Where we have seen barriers to entry in some countries are manifest in one of two ways. The first is, frankly, there are a lot of countries that are open to American investment, but they don't have strong rule of law. By that I mean you can sign a contract with them, but if a month later someone else's cousin gets elected judge or mayor, someone will come knocking on your door and saying this business no longer belongs to you, it belongs to us. So there's that sense. In some cases it's security. They just feel that there's not enough security in the country for them to make long-term investments. And in other cases, frankly, there are things, we have competitors that bribe foreign officials. We lose business opportunities because someone shows up with a bag of cash, and that's unlawful and illegal for an American business to do. That said, we are constantly looking for opportunities where American expertise can provide resources. One of the areas you're seeing a lot of that now is in the mining of rare earth minerals, where multiple countries are lining up to invite American companies to come in and do that sort of mining in an ecologically responsible way, not in a destructive way to their natural environment. We think that's a huge opportunity as well for the U.S. And again, we want that going back, as it's a broken record, but these are the kinds of opportunities that are driven from the local level up. When you get these cables saying the local government or local economy is looking for greater U.S. investment in this sector, it allows us to partner with companies here that are looking for expansion abroad and hopefully create those opportunities for them.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I ask my questions, I want to go back to your characterization of USAID and the Democrats' responsibility for what happened with that program. I think you've heard from virtually every person who has talked today, and we certainly heard this morning in terms of the Foreign Relations Committee, that if there were improprieties in USAID, then we were on board with addressing those, and we were on board with making changes to make sure that didn't happen again. But the concern is the wholesale throwing out of the foreign assistance programs for the 0.3% of grants that we agree maybe should never have been made. A number of them are things that never happened. They've been made up, just like President Trump's reference to transgender mice in his State of the State address. That's not what happened. He was talking about transgenic mice, which are used in cancer experiments, not transgender mice. So I think we would all be better served if we tried to work together to address the challenges of providing foreign assistance in a way that, as Secretary Rubio has said, and I think most of us have agreed with, makes it more effective and better. And I'm not sure that the chainsaw that Elon Musk took to USAID makes it better on its face. And we can disagree about that, and I'm sure we will, because we may have different views. And I, for one, don't appreciate Senator Mullin suggesting that because I may have a different view on how USAID foreign assistance should be operated, that I'm less of a patriot and don't believe in the security of this country. So, Mr. Chairman, I would hope that we could dispense with the name-calling in the future. And I agree, you've been a great defender of foreign assistance programs. Well, I feel like I have too.
Yeah,
so we should agree on that.
You have, and I guess the only reason I did this, you've accused this man of killing 15 million people.
I didn't accuse him.
Well,
I think they quoted a report that suggested that because of changes to foreign assistance, that there would be significant numbers of people killed. I don't blame Senator Rubio for that. But I do blame the policy changes for the devastating impact they will have on people across the world. And I hope that we can fix those and that we are all committed to doing that.
I'll give you another minute because I interrupted you.
Okay. Well, let me go back to the question that I asked this morning, Senator Rubio, which has to do with Ukraine. Because we were talking about sanctions, and one of the things you pointed out is that the Trump administration has left in place the sanctions on Russia. Today, the EU and the UK imposed sweeping new sanctions on Russia, including targeting close to 200 vessels in Moscow's shadow fleet. But we haven't seen our sanctions change to address the changes that Moscow has been able to make in response to the sanctions regime that we've put on. So the question is, and I asked you this morning, Senator Graham and Blumenthal have a bill that has 80 Senate sponsors on it that would put in place secondary sanctions on Russia because of its continued failure to come to the negotiating table to really look at how to end the war in Ukraine. Is this legislation that you or the Trump administration or the White House would support?
Well, it's legislation we're most certainly aware of. I am not today in a position to tell you we're going to endorse it or support it at this time, and I'll explain why. We want to continue to play the role where we can speak to both sides of this conflict and get them to the table to end this war once and for all. The President is fully aware, as he has reminded on numerous occasions, both in posts on social media and in public statements, he fully recognizes that he has options at his disposal. I can also tell you, and I believe you're personally aware, along with Senator Graham, that we have warned the Russians for the better part of 2 months that the Senate is working on a package which is far more severe than anything the President could impose under his own authority in many cases, and that eventually if progress isn't made, people were going to give us some time to work this out, but if that didn't work out after a while, there was nothing that it was going to happen. This was going to come. So we're aware of that. Suffice it to say that we are still hopeful, although at the same time realistic, but hopeful with our eyes wide open, that we can reach a point here where we can begin even the process of negotiating this. We've spent a lot of time on this. We've met with both sides, far more with the Ukrainians than with the Russians. We've had 2 technical talks with the Russians in the past, 1 high-level engagement. The President's spoken to President Putin 3 times. We've spoken to the Ukrainians far more. So what we're expecting now, based on the President's phone conversation yesterday and my conversations over the weekend with Mr. Lavrov, is that at some point here fairly soon, maybe in a number of days, maybe this week hopefully, the Russian side is going to present terms that they would want to see, just broad terms that would allow us to move towards a ceasefire. And that ceasefire would then allow us to enter into detailed negotiations to bring about an end to the conflict. We are hoping that will happen. We believe that the term sheet that the Russians produce will tell us a lot about their true intentions. If it's a term sheet that's realistic and you can work off of it, that's one thing. If it makes demands that we know are unrealistic, I think that will be indicative. And what the President will decide to do at that point, I can't speak for him at this moment. I'm not prepared to say. But I think we all know he is aware of both his authorities to sanction, and he is well aware of the fact that this bill is moving in the Senate. And it's one of the reasons why I asked Senator Graham to join me in Turkey when we engaged the night you arrived with our Ukrainian partners as well.
I appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that you have talked more to the Ukrainians. And yet, this morning when we talked about continued assistance to Ukraine, you said that nothing had been done to cut that assistance. But you have cut energy assistance that's necessary for repairing their electric grid after missile attacks and keeping electricity flowing. I've visited some of those electric grids, so I know how critical they are. You've cut assistance to help Ukrainians document, verify, and report on war crimes to allow them to one day hold perpetrators accountable. Again, I've had the opportunity to meet with some of those folks who were in the process of documenting the atrocities that have occurred. You've cut cost-free cooperation with international bodies that are tracking kidnapped Ukrainian children. You've cut assistance to strengthen security sector oversight, which is helpful to us as we make sure that the Ukrainians are spending funds that we have provided them appropriately. So in my mind, that doesn't mean that this administration has continued assistance to Ukraine. It means that you've cut assistance to Ukraine in many areas, the ones I just outlined. And so, again, if we're going to see a dynamic change in these negotiations and to get legitimate peace negotiations going on, then we've got to put more pressure on Russia. And so far, the administration has not been willing to do that.
Well, I don't agree we haven't put pressure on Russia as we continue to insist upon them coming to the table. For example, they agreed, albeit less than ideal, direct talks for the first time in 3 years occurred this weekend in Turkey. For the first time in multiple years, since at least 2022, the Russians have agreed to produce documentation. Now, it may not lead to anything, and at some point we may wind up right at the point you're pointing to. The President's just not prepared to close the door on that yet because he still hopes to achieve peace.
Let me just clarify. My understanding is that President Trump offered to go to Turkey to meet with President Zelensky and with Vladimir Putin. President Zelensky went. Vladimir Putin refused to go and basically dissed the President's willingness to go to meet with them in person.
I think the President...
that was certainly what was reported.
Yeah, but I was on that trip. I think the President expressed, yes, so there's going to be a meeting between Zelensky and Putin I'm more than willing to go. But there wasn't going to be one. Putin never agreed to a meeting with Zelensky.
Right. So the president was willing to go, but Vladimir Putin wasn't. If that in my mind means that Putin, while the president may be willing to negotiate and may be willing to sit at the table, Vladimir Putin is not, because it's in his interest. He believes it's in Russia's interest to carry this war out as long as possible, because he thinks that Russia benefits from that.
Well,
until we change the dynamic, that's what he's going to continue to do.
Well, again, that may very well be what he believes. At some point, time will, and his actions will tell. But I think the president wants to exhaust every opportunity to bring about a peaceful negotiation here, an end to this conflict as soon as possible. And I think we should be happy that we have a president that wants to end a war, and that he's, you know, it's taxing on the patience, and it's taken a long time. But 4 months has been dedicated to this. But ultimately, I think it's a good thing that we have a president that's trying to end this war. He wants to give it every available chance possible. And doesn't want to foreclose anything too early. If there's still a chance to achieve peace, he wants to make that happen.
I'm not disagreeing with that. I agree. I think we should try and end this war. I'm just questioning his tactics and whether he's really being successful in the way he's doing this. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter for the record a fact sheet that it's called the PRC Supporting International Assistance as U.S. Withdraws. It's dated April 29th, 2025, and what it lays out is specific examples of where the PRC has come in and taken over U.S. assistance programs as we've withdrawn.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Senator Britt's on her way. If you can just hang in there a few more minutes. It's been a long day. You've done a terrific job, in my view. Let me just, what you said the last 5 or 6 minutes has been really, I think, put a fine point on what we're trying to do here. Count me in for ending the war peacefully, honorably, and justly. And I think President Trump, above all others, has the ability to do that because, quite frankly, I think he's the one guy that Putin probably does not want to cross. Senator Shaheen's point, I share her concerns in this regard. President Trump called for a ceasefire. Ukraine said yes. Putin's making excuses. He said, go to Istanbul. Zelensky went. Putin didn't. Having said all that, you've described a process that's very clear to me. In the coming days, not weeks, Russia will give us a term sheet of what they need to get to a ceasefire, and we'll have some indication of how serious they are. I think that's a good thing, Marco, that we're now getting them to put up their terms for a ceasefire. And after they do that, I'll be glad to talk to you and get your view of what this means, and I'll share my view. The fact that you invited me to Turkey, I think the committee should be, that was really, I appreciated that. You took a member of the Senate, and I was at every meeting, and Secretary Rubio wanted people to hear the way our system works. And you, quite frankly, my friend, have really gone the extra mile of trying to bring this coalition together, give Russia the space it needs to get to yes. I'm not out to humiliate Putin. I'm no fan of his. I understand that we want to get this war over. But in the next few days, we'll have some indication of how serious he is. And I promise you we're over 80 now. If the next few days is like the last months, then you can just count on us moving, because I think it's our job to try to help the world in this war. The Chinese are watching. This is a dress rehearsal for Taiwan. How this ends, I think, will determine greatly what happens to the future of Taiwan. And I want this war to end in a way that Xi thinks, well, that didn't work out too well for Putin. Again, I'm not out to humiliate Russia, but I am out to make sure the war ends in a way not to start new wars. Afghanistan was a disaster. If we do not get this right in Ukraine and the world perceives that Putin got away with it, that will be even worse. That will be worse than Afghanistan. So I have every confidence we're not going to let that happen. I have every confidence in Secretary Rubio. I have seen him in action, and I tell you, the way he interacted with his colleagues in NATO was just masterful, and I appreciate being part of that trip. And what you're doing in Syria, we don't talk enough about it, could be a game changer. Because you're right, if we don't do something, in a matter of weeks or months, the place will become ungoverned and we'll have another Al-Qaeda, ISIS recruiting camp in the Mideast. So count me in for wanting to help you on sanctions. Do we know where Senator Britt's at? All right. She had her chance. She's great. She's working hard. You've been here all day. Thank you so much. The hearing's adjourned.
We just need to send an email out on the questions.